Hello there, my dear sleepy scientists. It's time to settle in for another gentle journey through the hidden wonders that surround us every single day. Tonight, we're going to explore something so beautiful and mysterious that it touches your soul every time you hear your favourite song, yet remains invisible to the casual listener. Have you ever wondered why certain melodies can bring tears to your eyes, while others make you want to dance? Why does a major chord sound happy, while a minor chord feels melancholy? Why do some musical combinations feel perfectly right, while others create tension that begs for resolution? These aren't just artistic choices, they're clues to one of the universe's most elegant secrets. Tonight, we're discovering the mathematics hidden in music, the numerical relationships that transform simple vibrations into the language of emotion itself. So pull your blankets a little closer, let your breathing slow down naturally, and if you haven't already, gently tap that subscribe button to join our peaceful family of nighttime learners. Together, we're about to drift into the beautiful world where numbers become melodies and equations become the songs that touch your heart. There's something deeply mysterious about the way music can reach into your chest and rearrange your emotions without saying a single word. You've felt this countless times, perhaps when a song from your childhood suddenly plays on the radio, instantly transporting you back to your grandmother's kitchen on Sunday afternoons, or when you hear that one melody that always makes you feel peaceful no matter how chaotic your day has been. I remember lying in bed as a child listening to my mother hum a lullaby whose gentle rise and fall seemed to contain all the comfort in the world, though I had no idea why those particular notes felt so perfectly soothing, so mathematically right. We all carry this intimate knowledge of music's power in our bones. You've experienced the way certain chord progressions can make your heart skip a beat, felt the satisfying resolution when a melody finally comes home to its starting note, sensed the tension when a song builds toward a climax you somehow know is coming, even though you've never heard it before. There's something both universal and deeply personal about how music speaks to us, creating emotions that feel completely natural yet mysteriously precise, as if the composer had discovered some secret formula for translating feeling into sound. Tonight, we're going to uncover why these musical experiences feel so inevitable and right. The secret isn't just in the artistry of composition, it's written into the very mathematics of sound itself, from the smallest vibrations that create individual notes to the complex numerical relationships that make harmony possible. Music, it turns out, is mathematics made audible. Numbers transformed into the language that speaks directly to your soul. Let me take you to the very beginning of music's mathematical story, to that moment when a simple vibration transforms into something your brain recognizes as a musical note. Imagine a guitar string resting peacefully in silence, holding within itself infinite possibilities for sound. When you gently pluck that string, you're setting in motion one of the most beautiful mathematical phenomena in nature. A wave of compression and rarefaction that travels through the air at exactly 343 meters per second, carrying with it a precise numerical signature that your brain will interpret as a specific musical pitch. The mathematics begins with the string itself vibrating back and forth in a pattern so regular and predictable that it could serve as a natural metronome. If that string vibrates 440 times per second, your brain hears the note we call A above middle C. If it vibrates exactly twice as fast, 880 times per second, you hear the same note A, but one octave higher. This isn't coincidence or artistic convention. It's pure mathematics expressing itself through the physical properties of vibrating objects and the mathematical way your auditory system processes those vibrations. What makes this even more beautiful is how these vibrations create waves in the air that follow precise mathematical formulas. Each compression pushes air molecules closer together, creating a region of higher pressure that travels outward from the source like ripples on a perfectly still pond. These pressure waves alternate with rarefactions, regions where air molecules are pulled slightly farther apart, creating a sine wave pattern that mathematicians have studied for centuries. The frequency of these waves, measured in cycles per second or hertz, becomes the mathematical foundation for everything we call musical pitch. Your ear performs its own mathematical miracle when these sound waves reach your eardrum. The spiral-shaped cochlea in your inner ear acts like a living spectrum analyzer, with different regions responding to different frequencies according to precise logarithmic relationships. High frequencies stimulate hair cells near the beginning of the cochlear spiral, while low frequencies travel further along before finding their mathematical match. This biological frequency analysis allows your brain to extract the mathematical information encoded in sound waves and transform it into the conscious experience of musical pitch. The ancient Greeks were among the first to discover that music's emotional power springs from mathematical relationships hidden within sound itself. Pythagoras, perhaps around 500 BCE, made the profound discovery that when you divide a vibrating string into simple mathematical ratios, you create intervals that sound naturally harmonious to the human ear. A string half the length produces a note exactly 1 octave higher, a 2-to-1 frequency ratio that feels so mathematically perfect that virtually every musical culture in human history has recognized the octave as a fundamental unit of musical organization. This mathematical foundation extends beyond simple ratios to encompass the complex wave interactions that create the rich textures we hear in musical instruments. When a violin string vibrates, it doesn't just produce one pure frequency. It creates a complex mathematical series of overtones, each one an integer multiple of the fundamental frequency. The second harmonic vibrates at exactly twice the fundamental frequency, the third harmonic at 3 times, the fourth at 4 times, and so on, creating what mathematicians call the harmonic series. These overtones blend together in proportions determined by the physical properties of the instrument, creating the unique mathematical signature that allows you to distinguish a violin from a flute, even when they're playing the same note. The mathematical elegance becomes even more apparent when you consider how your brain processes these complex waveforms. Through a process that mirrors the Fourier transform used in digital signal processing, your auditory system automatically decomposes complex sounds into their component frequencies, analyzing the mathematical relationships between different harmonic components to determine not just pitch, but also timbre, the quality that makes each instrument sound unique. This biological mathematics happens so quickly and effortlessly that you're usually unaware of the complex calculations your brain performs thousands of times per second. Even the air through which these mathematical vibrations travel participates in music's numerical dance. Sound waves travel through air at a speed determined by temperature, pressure, and humidity, all following precise mathematical relationships that acousticians can calculate with extraordinary accuracy. When multiple sound waves meet in the air, they combine according to mathematical principles of wave interference, sometimes reinforcing each other to create louder sounds, sometimes cancelling each other out to create moments of relative silence. This mathematical foundation of sound creation and perception connects your musical experience to the deepest patterns that govern physical reality. The same wave mathematics that describes ocean swells and light propagation also governs the vibrations that become your favourite melodies. Every note you hear represents a precise numerical frequency. Every harmony reflects simple mathematical ratios, and every musical texture emerges from the complex but predictable mathematics of wave interference and harmonic interaction. There's something almost magical about the way certain musical intervals seem to lock together perfectly, creating harmonies that feel as natural and inevitable as breathing itself. When you hear 2 notes played together in an octave, the same note but one higher than the other, there's an immediate sense of unity and completion that transcends cultural boundaries and musical training. This isn't artistic preference or learned behaviour. It's your brain recognizing one of the most fundamental mathematical relationships in all of music, the beautifully simple 2-to-1 frequency ratio that creates the octave interval, where one note vibrates exactly twice as fast as its partner below. The mathematical elegance of harmony becomes even more apparent when we explore the perfect fifth, perhaps the most universally pleasing interval after the octave. When you play C and G together, you're creating a harmony based on a 3-to-2 frequency ratio. If the C vibrates at 261.6 Hz, the G above it vibrates at exactly 392.4 Hz, a relationship so mathematically pure that it resonates not just in your ears, but seems to align with something fundamental in the way your brain processes mathematical relationships. This 3-to-2 ratio appears throughout nature, in the mathematical spirals of seashells, the proportions of flower petals, the orbital relationships between planets, suggesting that our love for this harmony might stem from its connection to deep mathematical patterns that govern the physical world. The ancient Greek philosopher Pythagoras, made the extraordinary discovery that musical beauty emerges from numerical simplicity. Legend tells us that he noticed the mathematical relationships between harmonious sounds while listening to blacksmiths working at their forges, where hammers of different weights created tones that harmonized according to their mathematical proportions. Whether or not this story is historically accurate, Pythagoras certainly understood that the most consonant intervals correspond to the simplest mathematical ratios: the octave at 2 to 1, the perfect fifth at 3 to 2, the perfect fourth at 4 to 3, 3. These ratios are so mathematically elegant that they seem to represent a kind of acoustic geometry, where numerical relationships become audible architecture. This mathematical foundation of harmony explains why certain combinations of notes feel stable and restful, while others create tension that seems to demand resolution. When two frequencies form simple ratios, their sound waves align in regular, predictable patterns that your brain can easily process and organize. The mathematical order in these wave relationships translates into the psychological experience of consonance, that sense of musical rightness and completion you feel when listening to a perfectly tuned chord. More complex ratios, like 16 to 15 or 25 to 24, create intervals that sound slightly unstable or out of tune, because their wave patterns don't align as regularly, creating the mathematical complexity that your brain interprets as dissonance. Different musical cultures throughout history have built their harmonic systems around these same mathematical principles, though they've sometimes chosen different points of emphasis within the infinite spectrum of possible ratios. Western classical music developed around the mathematical relationships we hear in major and minor triads, where three notes combine in ratios that create stable, mathematically coherent structures. The major triad uses frequency ratios of 4 to 5 to 6, creating a mathematical balance that most Western ears find naturally pleasant and complete. The minor triad adjusts one of these ratios slightly, creating a different mathematical relationship that somehow translates into the emotional quality we associate with sadness or introspection. The harmonic series that emerges naturally from any vibrating object provides the mathematical blueprint for these pleasing combinations. When you pluck a guitar string or strike a piano key, you're not just creating one frequency, but a whole mathematical family of related frequencies. The fundamental tone plus a series of overtones that follow the simple mathematical sequence 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, 6, and so on. These naturally occurring mathematical relationships explain why certain combinations of notes sound harmonious. They're recreating in simplified form the mathematical patterns that already exist within single notes. This mathematical basis of harmony extends beyond simple two-note intervals to encompass the complex chord structures that create the harmonic richness of sophisticated music. When a jazz pianist plays a complex chord with 6 or 7 different notes, each note relates to the others through mathematical ratios that determine whether the overall sound feels stable or tense, bright or dark, simple or complex. The mathematics becomes more intricate, but the underlying principle remains the same. Harmony emerges from the mathematical relationships between frequencies, and our emotional response to those harmonies reflects our brain's remarkable ability to perceive and appreciate mathematical order. The sacred geometry of harmony reveals itself most clearly in the way these mathematical relationships seem to transcend the purely physical realm and touch something deeper in human consciousness. When you hear a perfectly tuned chord, you're experiencing mathematics as beauty, numerical relationships transformed into emotional experience through the miraculous process by which your brain interprets the mathematical patterns hidden within sound waves. This connection between mathematical ratio and musical emotion suggests that harmony might be one of the most direct ways that abstract mathematical truth becomes tangible human experience. If harmony is music's sacred geometry, then scales are its gentle architecture, carefully constructed mathematical staircases that guide melody through predictable patterns of tension and release, creating the familiar pathways that make musical phrases feel like coming home. When you hum a simple melody, or find yourself unconsciously singing along to a favourite song, you're following mathematical patterns that have been built into scales through centuries of cultural evolution and acoustic discovery. These aren't arbitrary arrangements of notes, but rather carefully balanced mathematical systems that work with your brain's natural pattern recognition abilities to create the sense of musical logic and inevitability. The major scale, perhaps the most familiar musical structure in Western culture, demonstrates how mathematical precision can create emotional effect through carefully chosen frequency relationships. When you sing do re mi fa sol la ti do, you're ascending through a mathematical sequence of intervals that follows the pattern whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. This pattern creates specific mathematical ratios between adjacent notes that have remained remarkably consistent across different cultures and historical periods, suggesting that there's something fundamentally satisfying about these particular mathematical relationships. The mathematics becomes even more beautiful when you consider how the major scale's interval pattern creates a sense of gravitational pull between certain notes. The seventh note of the scale, that Ti in do re mi, sits just a half step below the octave, creating a mathematical tension that seems to demand resolution upward to the home note. This mathematical relationship, where one frequency sits so close to a 2-to-1 ratio with the fundamental that it creates acoustic beating and harmonic restlessness, explains why melodies in major keys often feel like they're being pulled towards satisfying conclusions. Your brain perceives this mathematical near-miss as musical tension that can only be resolved by reaching the mathematically pure octave relationship. Minor scales create an entirely different emotional landscape through subtle but mathematically significant changes to this interval pattern. By lowering the third degree of the major scale by a half step, you change the mathematical relationship between the root note and this crucial harmony tone from a major third, 5-to-4 frequency ratio, to a minor third, 6-to-5 frequency ratio. This small mathematical adjustment creates the distinctive emotional quality that most listeners associate with sadness, introspection, or mystery. The mathematical difference is tiny, just a few cycles per second in most cases, yet the psychological effect is profound, demonstrating how sensitive your brain is to precise mathematical relationships in music. Different musical cultures have developed their own mathematical approaches to organizing pitch relationships, creating scales that reflect both acoustic principles and cultural values. The pentatonic scale, used extensively in Chinese, Celtic, and African musical traditions, eliminates the mathematically complex half-step intervals entirely, creating a 5-note pattern that avoids the tension points that might disrupt the scale's mathematical equilibrium. This mathematical simplicity explains why pentatonic melodies often sound peaceful and stable. They're built from mathematical relationships that minimize harmonic conflict and create a sense of floating serenity. Indian classical music demonstrates perhaps the most sophisticated mathematical approach to scale construction, with ragas that use precise microtonal intervals calculated to create specific emotional and spiritual effects. These scales often employ mathematical ratios that fall between the keys of a piano, creating frequency relationships that Western ears might find exotic or unfamiliar, but that follow rigorous mathematical principles developed over millennia of musical exploration. Each raga represents a different mathematical solution to the problem of organizing pitch relationships to evoke particular moods or spiritual states. The mathematical beauty of scales becomes apparent when you consider how they create frameworks for improvisation and composition. Jazz musicians working within the mathematical structure of a blues scale can create endless melodic variations while maintaining the mathematical relationships that give the blues its distinctive emotional character. The scale provides a mathematical vocabulary, a set of frequency relationships that work well together, allowing creative expression within a mathematically coherent framework. Modern composers and music theorists continue to explore new mathematical approaches to scale construction, sometimes using mathematical concepts like equal temperament to divide the octave into 12 mathematically equal intervals, creating a system where every half step represents the same mathematical ratio, the 12th root of 2, approximately 1.059463. This mathematical solution allows instruments to play in any key with equal mathematical accuracy, though it requires tiny compromises to the pure mathematical ratios that create perfect harmony. The gentle architecture of scales reveals how mathematical principles can be transformed into emotional experience through the remarkable way your brain processes pattern and relationship. Each scale represents a different mathematical solution to the challenge of organizing frequencies into coherent, emotionally meaningful sequences. When you recognize a familiar melody or feel moved by an unfamiliar song, you're responding to mathematical architecture that speaks directly to the pattern recognition systems that help you navigate the world, creating bridges between abstract numerical relationships and the most intimate aspects of human emotional experience. Deep within every piece of music beats a mathematical heart that measures time with the precision of a perfectly calibrated clock, dividing the continuous flow of moments into discrete countable units that your body recognizes and wants to move with. This is rhythm, not just the drums or percussion you might think of first, but the fundamental mathematical grid that underlies all musical expression, turning the abstract passage of time into something tangible, danceable, and emotionally compelling. When you find yourself tapping your foot to a song or feeling your heart sink with a steady beat, you're experiencing one of the most primal connections between mathematics and human physiology, where numerical patterns become the pulse that drives musical life. The foundation of rhythmic mathematics lies in the simple concept of division, taking a larger unit of time and splitting it into smaller equal parts with mathematical precision. A basic musical measure in 4/4 time, for example, takes a fixed duration and divides it into 4 mathematically equal beats, creating a framework where each beat lasts exactly 1/4 of the total measure. This mathematical division creates predictable points in time where stronger musical events typically occur, giving rhythm its sense of forward motion and making it possible for multiple musicians to play together in synchronization, despite having no direct communication about timing. Time signatures function like mathematical fractions that describe how rhythm organizes temporal flow. The familiar 4/4 signature tells you that each measure contains 4 beats, with each beat lasting the duration of a quarter note, essentially a mathematical recipe for dividing time that musicians can follow with remarkable precision. But rhythm's mathematical possibilities extend far beyond this common pattern. A waltz in 3/4 time creates an entirely different mathematical feel by dividing each measure into 3 beats instead of 4, while complex meters like 7/8 or 5/4 create mathematical asymmetries that can feel exotic or unsettling to ears accustomed to the mathematical symmetry of more common time signatures. The mathematical beauty of rhythm becomes especially apparent in the way it can create mathematical relationships between different layers of musical activity. In polyrhythmic music, common in African and Latin American traditions, multiple mathematical patterns occur simultaneously. Perhaps one instrument playing a pattern that repeats every 3 beats, while another follows a 4-beat cycle. These overlapping mathematical cycles create complex interference patterns, where the different rhythms align at regular mathematical intervals, creating moments of synchronization that feel like mathematical revelations when they occur. Syncopation demonstrates how rhythm can create emotional excitement through mathematical surprise, placing musical emphasis on mathematically unexpected parts of the beat pattern. When a jazz pianist plays a melody that emphasizes the offbeats rather than the downbeats, they're working against the mathematical expectations established by the underlying time signature, creating rhythmic tension that makes the music feel more alive and unpredictable. This mathematical displacement of accent creates the sense of rhythmic complexity that makes syncopated music feel sophisticated and engaging. Your body responds to rhythmic mathematics in ways that reveal deep connections between numerical pattern recognition and biological function. Your heart beats with its own mathematical regularity. Your breathing follows mathematical cycles, and your brain waves oscillate at specific mathematical frequencies that change with different states of consciousness. When external musical rhythms align with these internal biological rhythms, you experience entrainment, a mathematical synchronization between your physiology and the musical mathematics that can create profound feelings of connection and flow. Different cultures have developed distinct mathematical approaches to organizing rhythm, creating rhythmic vocabularies that reflect both mathematical possibility and cultural values. West African drumming traditions often use mathematical patterns based on cycles of 12 or 16 beats, with complex subdivisions that create intricate mathematical tapestries of interlocking rhythms. Indian classical music employs mathematical concepts called talas that can span many measures and include mathematically irregular groupings of beats, creating rhythmic cycles that might not resolve to their starting point for minutes at a time. The mathematics of rhythm extends into the micro-timing variations that give music its human feel and emotional expressiveness. Even the most mathematically precise musicians introduce tiny timing variations, microsecond deviations from perfect mathematical regularity that prevent rhythm from feeling mechanical or lifeless. These subtle mathematical imperfections, paradoxically, are essential for making rhythm feel natural and emotionally compelling, suggesting that musical mathematics works best when it includes carefully controlled elements of mathematical randomness. Modern technology has revealed new dimensions of rhythmic mathematics through tools that can measure timing with extraordinary precision. Digital audio workstations can display rhythmic mathematics visually, showing exactly how musical events align with mathematical grids of beats and subdivisions. This technological precision has both enabled new forms of mathematical musical expression and highlighted the importance of the subtle mathematical variations that distinguish human musical performance from purely computational rhythm generation. The numerical heartbeat of rhythm connects your conscious experience of music to the mathematical patterns that govern temporal perception itself, creating bridges between abstract mathematical concepts and the most physical embodied aspects of musical experience, where numbers become movement and mathematical patterns become the irresistible pulse that makes music feel alive. Melody is perhaps music's most intimate mathematical storyteller, weaving frequency relationships into narrative arcs that feel as natural and inevitable as conversation, yet follow mathematical principles so precise they could be plotted on graphs and analysed with equations. When you follow a beautiful melody as it rises and falls, you're experiencing mathematics in its most emotionally direct form. Numerical relationships between pitches that create patterns of tension and release, expectation and fulfillment that speak to something deep in your brain's pattern recognition systems. Every melodic phrase represents a carefully crafted mathematical journey through frequency space, where each note's relationship to its neighbours determines whether the melody feels like it's climbing toward a peak, settling into rest, or reaching toward an inevitable conclusion. The mathematics of melodic intervals provides the foundation for melody's emotional power. When a melody moves from one note to another, the mathematical relationship between their frequencies determines how that movement feels to your ear. A step upward by one whole tone, a mathematical frequency ratio of 9 to 8, or approximately 1.125, creates a sense of gentle upward motion that feels natural and comfortable. A leap upward by a perfect fifth, that 3 to 2 frequency ratio we explored in harmony, creates a sense of dramatic ascent that feels bold and confident. These aren't arbitrary associations, but reflect the way your brain processes mathematical relationships and translates them into emotional experience. Melodic contour, the shape that a melody creates as it moves through pitch space, follows mathematical principles that seem to mirror other patterns in nature and human experience. Melodies that follow arch-shaped contours, rising gradually to a peak before descending, feel satisfying and complete in a way that echoes mathematical curves found everywhere, from the trajectory of thrown objects to the distribution of random events. This mathematical elegance explains why so many memorable melodies follow similar contour patterns across different cultures and musical styles. They're tapping into mathematical relationships that resonate with fundamental aspects of how your brain processes pattern and movement. The concept of melodic gravity demonstrates how mathematics creates directional pull within musical phrases. Certain notes within a scale have mathematical relationships to the tonic, the home note, that create varying degrees of stability or instability. The leading tone, sitting just a half step below the octave, has a mathematical relationship so close to the pure 2-to-1 octave ratio that it creates acoustic tension, making melodies that land on this note feel incomplete until they resolve upward to the mathematical stability of the octave. This mathematical tension and release cycle creates the sense of melodic momentum that makes well-crafted melodies feel like they're moving toward inevitable destinations. Cultural differences in melodic mathematics reveal how the same mathematical principles can be applied in diverse ways to create distinct musical languages. Arabic maqam traditions use microtonal intervals, mathematical frequency relationships that fall between the keys of a piano, to create melodic inflections that convey specific emotional qualities. Indian ragas employ mathematical concepts like meend, where melodies slide continuously between discrete pitches, creating mathematical curves rather than the stepwise mathematical relationships more common in Western melody. These different approaches to melodic mathematics create distinctive emotional vocabularies that reflect both acoustic principles and cultural values. The mathematical concept of melodic sequence, repeating a melodic pattern at different pitch levels, demonstrates how mathematical transformation can create musical coherence and development. When a composer takes a melodic fragment and repeats it starting on different notes, they're applying mathematical operations, translation and scaling, to create patterns that feel both familiar and progressive. Your brain recognizes the mathematical relationships within the repeated pattern while also processing the mathematical relationships between the different iterations, creating a sense of melodic logic that makes complex musical passages feel coherent and memorable. Melodic rhythm adds another layer of mathematical complexity, where the timing of notes creates mathematical patterns that interact with pitch relationships to determine melodic character. A melody played with even, mathematically regular note durations creates a different emotional effect than the same pitches played with mathematically irregular timing. Syncopated melodies, where notes occur at mathematically unexpected moments, create rhythmic tension that adds excitement and sophistication to melodic expression. The mathematical interplay between pitch intervals and rhythmic intervals creates the complex numerical patterns that give melodies their distinctive personalities. Modern analysis of melodic mathematics has revealed fascinating patterns in how memorable melodies are constructed. Researchers have found that the most memorable melodies often follow mathematical principles of optimal complexity. They contain enough mathematical pattern to feel coherent and learnable, but enough mathematical variation to maintain interest and avoid predictability. This mathematical sweet spot between order and surprise appears to be universal across musical cultures, suggesting that melodic mathematics taps into fundamental aspects of how your brain processes and remembers sequential information. The mathematical journey of melody connects the abstract world of numerical relationships to the most personal and emotional aspects of musical experience, creating pathways where mathematical precision becomes poetic expression, where frequency ratios become the language of the heart, and where the elegant mathematics of pitch and time transform into the melodies that accompany you through life's most meaningful moments. When 3 or more notes sound together in a chord, something mathematically magical happens that transforms simple addition into musical alchemy. You might think that combining multiple frequencies would create chaos or noise, but instead, when these frequencies relate to each other through precise mathematical ratios, they blend into unified harmonic structures that feel complete and emotionally satisfying. This is the quiet calculus of chords, the way multiple mathematical relationships occur simultaneously, creating complex wave interactions that your brain processes as single, coherent musical objects with their own emotional qualities and harmonic personalities. The mathematical foundation of chord construction rests on the harmonic series, that beautiful mathematical sequence that emerges naturally from any vibrating object. When you play a low C on a piano, the string doesn't just vibrate at the fundamental frequency of approximately 261.6 Hz. It also vibrates in mathematically precise segments, creating overtones at exactly twice the fundamental frequency, the octave, 3 times the fundamental, the perfect fifth above the octave, 4 times the fundamental, another octave higher, 5 times the fundamental, the major third above that, and so on. These naturally occurring mathematical relationships provide the template for chord construction, explaining why certain combinations of notes sound harmonious, while others create tension or dissonance. A simple major triad, perhaps the most fundamental chord in Western music, demonstrates this mathematical elegance perfectly. The C major chord combines the frequencies in the mathematical ratio 4:5:6, creating a mathematical relationship so pure and stable that it resonates with the natural harmonic series. When you play C, E, and G together, you're not just combining 3 arbitrary frequencies, but rather creating a mathematical structure that mirrors the acoustic relationships already present within the single note C. This mathematical alignment explains why major triads sound complete and stable. They're reinforcing mathematical patterns that already exist in nature. The mathematics becomes even more fascinating when you consider how chord qualities emerge from subtle, mathematical adjustments to these basic ratios. A minor triad uses the mathematical ratio 10:12:15, which flattens the third degree by creating a slightly smaller mathematical relationship between the root and the third. This tiny mathematical change, altering a 5:4 ratio to a 6:5 ratio, creates the distinctive emotional quality that most listeners associate with sadness, mystery, or introspection. The mathematical difference amounts to just a few cycles per second in most cases, yet the psychological impact is profound, demonstrating the extraordinary sensitivity of your auditory system to precise mathematical relationships. Extended chords reveal how mathematical complexity can create harmonic sophistication and emotional richness. When jazz musicians play 7th chords, 9th chords, or 13th chords, they're adding mathematical layers that create more complex wave interaction patterns. A C major 7th chord includes the mathematical relationship created by adding the frequency ratio 15:8 to the basic triad, creating harmonic beating and interference patterns that give the chord its distinctive floating, unresolved quality. These mathematical complexities translate into the sophisticated emotional qualities that make jazz harmony feel more nuanced and psychologically complex than simple triadic harmony. The mathematical concept of chord inversion demonstrates how the same mathematical relationships can create different emotional effects depending on their spatial arrangement. When you play a C major triad with C in the bass, E in the middle, and G on top, you create one mathematical structure in frequency space. But when you move the C up an octave so that E becomes the lowest note, you create a mathematically related but acoustically different structure called a first inversion chord. The mathematical ratios between the notes remain the same, but their relationship to the harmonic series changes, creating a subtle but perceptible difference in the chord's stability and emotional character. Dissonance in chord construction reveals how mathematical complexity can create harmonic tension that demands resolution. When you add notes to a chord that create mathematical ratios like 15:16 or 24:25, ratios that come very close to simpler relationships but don't quite achieve them, you create beating patterns where the sound waves interfere with each other in mathematically regular but acoustically unstable ways. Your brain perceives this mathematical near-miss as harmonic tension that can only be resolved by moving to chord tones that create simpler, more stable mathematical relationships. Different musical traditions have developed distinct mathematical approaches to chord construction, creating harmonic vocabularies that reflect both acoustic principles and cultural values. Barbershop harmony emphasizes mathematical relationships that create strong overtone resonances, while impressionist classical music explores mathematical ratios that create floating, ambiguous harmonic effects. Electronic music has opened up entirely new possibilities for mathematical chord construction, allowing composers to create harmonic structures using any mathematical ratios they can imagine, even those that would be impossible to achieve with traditional acoustic instruments. The quiet calculus of chords connects the abstract world of mathematical relationships to the most immediate and emotional aspects of musical experience, creating harmonic structures where multiple numerical patterns combine to form unified acoustic objects that speak directly to your heart, while demonstrating the elegant mathematical principles that govern how frequencies interact in the complex, beautiful dance of harmonic resonance. There's something deeply satisfying about the way musical forms mirror the mathematical symmetries found throughout nature, creating structural patterns that feel as balanced and inevitable as the spiral of a nautilus shell or the radial symmetry of a snowflake. When you listen to a song that feels perfectly proportioned, with sections that seem to balance and complement each other in just the right way, you're experiencing musical architecture built on mathematical principles of symmetry that speak to fundamental pattern recognition systems in your brain. These aren't arbitrary formal conventions, but rather mathematical relationships in time that create the same sense of visual balance and completion that you might find in a well-designed building or a beautiful geometric pattern. The simplest and perhaps most universal form of musical symmetry is the ABA structure, where an opening musical section returns after a contrasting middle section, creating a mathematical reflection that feels like musical coming home. This ternary form appears in everything from children's songs to symphonic movements, demonstrating how mathematical symmetry and time can create emotional satisfaction across all levels of musical complexity. When you hear the return of the opening theme after a contrasting section, your brain recognizes the mathematical relationship between the first A section and the final A section, creating a sense of structural completion that mirrors the way visual symmetry creates balance in spatial art. Bach's musical architecture demonstrates perhaps the most sophisticated application of mathematical symmetry principles to musical composition. His fugues often employ mathematical transformations like inversion, where melodic intervals are flipped upside down while maintaining their mathematical relationships, and retrograde, where melodies are played backward while preserving their mathematical proportions. These mathematical operations create complex symmetrical relationships that unfold through time rather than space, allowing Bach to build musical structures where every element relates to every other element through precise mathematical transformations that create both intellectual satisfaction and emotional beauty. the mathematical concept of canon, where a melody is combined with identical copies of itself starting at different times, creates temporal symmetry patterns that demonstrate how mathematical precision can generate musical richness. When you hear "row, row, row your boat" sung as a round, you're experiencing a simple example of canonical symmetry, where the same mathematical sequence of intervals repeats at different starting points, creating harmonic interactions that emerge from the mathematical relationships between the temporally displaced versions of the melody. More complex canons can involve mathematical transformations like augmentation, where note values are mathematically lengthened, or diminution, where they're mathematically shortened, creating symmetrical relationships that operate at multiple mathematical scales simultaneously. Palindromic musical structures take symmetry to its mathematical extreme by creating musical phrases that remain identical, whether played forward or backward. Composers like Alban Berg embedded palindromic sections into larger works, creating mathematical pivot points where time seems to fold back on itself. These mathematical structures often correspond to dramatic or emotional climaxes in the music, as if the mathematical perfection of complete temporal symmetry creates a special kind of aesthetic intensity that heightens the emotional impact of the musical moment. The golden ratio and other mathematical proportions appear in musical forms with surprising frequency, creating structural symmetries that mirror the mathematical relationships found in natural growth patterns. When composers divide their works into sections whose lengths follow golden ratio proportions, they're applying the same mathematical principles that govern the spiral of a chambered nautilus or the branching patterns of trees. This mathematical approach to formal proportion creates musical structures that feel naturally balanced and satisfying, even when listeners aren't consciously aware of the mathematical relationships that govern the work's architecture. Repetition and variation in musical forms demonstrate how mathematical symmetry can be modified to create structural development while maintaining underlying mathematical relationships. Theme and variations movements take a mathematical approach to musical development, presenting an initial melody and then subjecting it to systematic mathematical transformations, changes in rhythm, harmony, ornamentation, or mode, while preserving the underlying mathematical structure that makes each variation recognizably related to the original theme. This mathematical process creates musical forms that feel both unified and progressive, combining the satisfaction of symmetrical relationship with the interest of mathematical development. Modern composers have explored new forms of mathematical symmetry through techniques like metric modulation and proportional notation, creating musical structures where mathematical relationships operate at multiple temporal scales simultaneously. These techniques can create complex symmetrical patterns where sections relate to each other through mathematical ratios rather than simple repetition, generating formal structures that feel balanced and coherent, while avoiding the predictability that might result from more obvious symmetrical relationships. The mathematical symmetries found in musical forms connect abstract mathematical concepts to the temporal art of music, creating structures where mathematical balance becomes emotional satisfaction, where numerical proportion becomes aesthetic beauty, and where the same mathematical principles that create visual harmony and spatial art generate the sense of formal perfection and structural completion that makes great musical works feel inevitable and complete, as if their mathematical architecture reveals fundamental truths about how pattern and symmetry create meaning and beauty in human consciousness. Hidden within the most beautiful musical compositions lies a mathematical secret that connects the growth patterns of sunflowers to the proportions of Debussy's piano pieces, the spiral of a nautilus shell to the phrase lengths in Mozart's sonatas. This is the golden ratio, that mysterious mathematical constant of approximately 1.618 that appears throughout nature and art with such frequency that it seems to represent some fundamental principle of aesthetic proportion. In music, this mathematical relationship manifests not through the frequencies of individual notes, but through the timing and proportions of musical phrases, creating temporal architectures that feel naturally balanced and satisfying in ways that composers often discover intuitively rather than through conscious mathematical calculation. The golden ratio emerges from a beautifully simple mathematical relationship, where a line is divided into two segments, such that the ratio of the whole line to the larger segment equals the ratio of the larger segment to the smaller segment. When expressed numerically, this creates the irrational number phi. Phi equals 1.618033988, a mathematical constant that connects to the Fibonacci sequence in fascinating ways. Each number in the Fibonacci sequence, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, equals the sum of the two preceding numbers, and as the sequence progresses, the ratio between consecutive Fibonacci numbers approaches ever closer to the golden ratio, creating a mathematical bridge between discrete counting numbers and continuous proportional relationships. In musical composition, the golden ratio often appears in the proportional relationships between different sections of a piece, creating mathematical architectures that unfold through time rather than space. When a composer creates a piece that lasts, say, 100 measures, and places the dramatic climax at measure 62, they're unconsciously, or sometimes consciously, applying golden ratio proportions, since 62 measures represents approximately 61.8% of the total length, remarkably close to the golden ratio's decimal expression of 0.618. This mathematical proportion creates a sense of perfect timing that feels neither too early nor too late, but rather positioned at the mathematically optimal point for maximum aesthetic impact. Debussy's piano piece, Clair de Lune, demonstrates the golden ratio's subtle influence on musical architecture with extraordinary precision. The piece's most emotionally intense moment, the soaring melodic peak that gives the piece its climactic character, occurs at exactly the golden ratio point of the composition's total length. This mathematical positioning creates a sense of temporal proportion that feels completely natural and inevitable, as if the music's emotional architecture follows the same mathematical principles that govern the spiral growth patterns of seashells and the branching structures of trees. The Fibonacci sequence itself appears in musical compositions through phrase lengths and structural proportions that create mathematical relationships between different sections. Bach's The Art of Fugue contains numerous examples of phrase lengths that follow Fibonacci numbers, sections lasting 5, 8, 13, or 21 measures that create mathematical proportions reflecting the sequence's additive properties. These mathematical relationships often exist below the threshold of conscious awareness, creating subliminal organizational patterns that give musical forms their sense of mathematical inevitability and organic growth. Mozart's piano sonatas frequently employ golden ratio proportions in their movement structures, with development sections and recapitulations beginning at points that divide the total movement length, according to Fee's mathematical relationships. This mathematical approach to formal proportion creates musical architectures that feel perfectly balanced, neither too symmetrical to be interesting nor too asymmetrical to feel coherent. The golden ratio provides a mathematical sweet spot between predictable symmetry and chaotic asymmetry, creating proportional relationships that feel both surprising and inevitable. The mathematical beauty of the golden ratio in music extends beyond formal proportion to encompass rhythmic and melodic relationships. Some composers have experimented with rhythmic patterns based on Fibonacci numbers, creating beat groupings of 2, 3, 5, 8, or 13 that generate complex polyrhythmic relationships while maintaining underlying mathematical coherence. These rhythmic applications of Fibonacci mathematics create temporal patterns that feel both sophisticated and natural, reflecting the same mathematical principles that govern natural growth and biological rhythms. Contemporary composers like Bela Bartok consciously incorporated golden ratio proportions into their compositional techniques, creating mathematical frameworks that guided both large-scale formal design and small-scale motivic development. Bartok's string quartets often feature climactic moments, positioned at golden ratio points, while his rhythmic patterns frequently employ Fibonacci-based groupings that create mathematical relationships between different temporal layers of the musical texture. The golden ratio's presence in music suggests that there might be deep mathematical principles underlying aesthetic experience that connect human perception of beauty to fundamental mathematical relationships found throughout nature. When you feel that a piece of music has perfect proportions, when a climax seems to occur at exactly the right moment, when phrase lengths feel naturally balanced and inevitable, you might be responding to mathematical relationships that echo the same proportional principles that create beauty in visual art, architecture, and natural forms. This mathematical whisper of the golden ratio in music reveals how abstract numerical relationships can become embodied aesthetic experience, creating temporal proportions that speak to something fundamental in human pattern recognition, while connecting the art of musical composition to the mathematical principles that seem to govern beauty and proportion throughout the natural world. There's something mysteriously familiar about the way certain musical compositions seem to contain infinite depth, where each level of detail reveals new patterns that echo the larger structures, creating musical textures that feel as complex and endlessly fascinating as the branching patterns of trees or the jagged coastlines of islands viewed from space. This is the mathematical principle of fractals expressing itself through musical composition, self-similar patterns that repeat at different scales, creating musical architectures where the same mathematical relationships govern both the largest formal structures and the smallest ornamental details, resulting in compositions that feel organically unified despite their incredible complexity. Fractals in mathematics are patterns that exhibit self-similarity across different scales of magnification, where zooming into any portion of the pattern reveals structures that mirror the overall design. A classic example is the Mandelbrot set, where each boundary detail contains infinite smaller copies of patterns found in the larger structure. In music, this mathematical principle manifests when compositional techniques create patterns that repeat at different temporal scales. Perhaps a rhythmic motif that appears in individual measures, then governs the structure of entire phrases, and finally determines the proportional relationships between major sections of a complete work. Bach's compositions demonstrate perhaps the most sophisticated application of fractal-like mathematical thinking to musical structure. In his Goldberg variations, mathematical patterns that govern the relationship between individual notes within measures also control the relationships between variations within the larger architectural structure. The same mathematical principles that create melodic intervals in individual phrases also determine how different variations relate to each other across the entire 30-variation cycle, creating a musical fractal where self-similar mathematical relationships operate simultaneously at multiple temporal scales. The mathematical concept of recursive iteration, where a process is applied repeatedly to its own output, appears frequently in musical composition through techniques like sequence and development. When a composer takes a musical phrase and systematically transforms it through mathematical operations like transposition, inversion, or augmentation, then applies the same transformations to the results. They're creating musical fractals where each iteration generates new material that maintains mathematical relationships to the original, while exploring new harmonic and melodic territories. This mathematical process can continue indefinitely, creating potentially infinite musical complexity from simple initial patterns. Canonic structures demonstrate fractal principles through temporal displacement and mathematical transformation. In Bach's Art of Fugue, subject entries occur at different temporal positions and pitch levels while maintaining their mathematical intervallic relationships, creating musical textures where the same melodic pattern appears simultaneously at multiple scales and temporal positions. These overlapping mathematical patterns create dense contrapuntal textures that exhibit the self-similarity characteristic of fractal structures, where each voice contributes to larger patterns while maintaining its own mathematical integrity. Modern composers have explicitly embraced fractal mathematics as a compositional tool, creating works where mathematical algorithms generate musical structures with infinite theoretical complexity. Composers like Yanis Xenakis used mathematical concepts from chaos theory and fractal geometry to create compositions where statistical patterns govern musical events at multiple temporal scales simultaneously. These mathematical approaches can generate musical textures that feel both highly organized and mysteriously unpredictable, reflecting the mathematical property of deterministic chaos, where simple mathematical rules create complex, seemingly random patterns. The fractal principle appears in musical ornamentation and embellishment, where decorative patterns applied to individual notes mirror the mathematical relationships found in larger melodic structures. Baroque ornamentation often follows mathematical patterns, where trills, turns, and grace notes create small-scale mathematical relationships that echo the interval patterns found in the underlying melodic line. This mathematical consistency between ornamental detail and structural design creates musical textures, where every level of magnification reveals mathematically related patterns. Jazz improvisation often exhibits fractal-like mathematical properties through the way musicians develop musical ideas across different temporal scales. A jazz soloist might begin with a simple rhythmic or melodic cell, then develop it through mathematical transformations that create longer phrases, which in turn become building blocks for still larger formal structures. The mathematical relationships that govern note-to-note motion within individual phrases also control phrase-to-phrase relationships within choruses, and chorus-to-chorus relationships within extended improvisations, creating musical fractals that unfold in real time. Electronic music and algorithmic composition have opened new possibilities for exploring fractal mathematics in musical texture. Computer algorithms can generate musical patterns where mathematical rules create self-similar structures at virtually infinite levels of detail, producing compositions that exhibit the endless complexity characteristic of mathematical fractals. These technological tools allow composers to explore mathematical relationships that would be impossible to achieve through traditional compositional methods, creating musical textures that push the boundaries of perceptual complexity while maintaining underlying mathematical coherence. The presence of fractal-like patterns in musical composition suggests that some of the most satisfying musical textures might reflect fundamental mathematical principles that govern pattern formation throughout nature. When you find yourself drawn into the seemingly infinite complexity of a Bach fugue or fascinated by the recursive development patterns in a jazz improvisation, you might be responding to mathematical structures that echo the fractal patterns found in everything from lung tissue to lightning bolts, connecting musical beauty to the deep mathematical principles that create complexity and self-similarity throughout the natural world. Deep within every musical sound lies a mathematical secret that would have seemed like pure magic to listeners just a few centuries ago. The hidden reality that any complex waveform, no matter how intricate or chaotic it might appear, can be perfectly reconstructed as a mathematical sum of simple sine waves, each vibrating at its own precise frequency and amplitude. This extraordinary mathematical principle, formalized by the French mathematician Joseph Fourier in the early 1800s, reveals that the rich, complex timbres you hear from violins, human voices, or crashing cymbals are actually mathematical illusions created by your brain's interpretation of multiple simple mathematical functions occurring simultaneously in precisely coordinated relationships. Fourier's insight emerged from his work on heat flow and mathematical physics, but its application to sound and music has revolutionized how we understand the mathematical nature of musical timbre. When you hear a single note played on a piano, what reaches your ears isn't actually a single frequency, but rather a complex mathematical mixture of dozens of different sine waves, each with its own frequency and amplitude, all combining according to precise mathematical principles to create the unified sound you perceive as piano. The fundamental frequency determines the pitch you hear, while the mathematically related overtones, frequencies that are integer multiples of the fundamental, create the distinctive timbral quality that allows you to distinguish a piano from a flute even when they're playing the same note. The mathematical beauty of the Fourier transform lies in its ability to decompose any periodic waveform into its component frequencies with perfect precision. If you were to record a single chord played by a full orchestra and subject it to Fourier analysis, the mathematical process would reveal exactly which frequencies are present, at what amplitudes, and how they change over time. This mathematical decomposition can be visualized as a spectrum, a graph showing frequency on the horizontal axis and amplitude on the vertical axis, creating a mathematical fingerprint that uniquely identifies the sound's harmonic content. Each musical instrument creates its own characteristic pattern of mathematical overtones that give it its distinctive sound. A violin's harmonic spectrum typically emphasizes certain mathematical relationships while suppressing others, creating the rich, singing quality that makes violin tone so expressive. A clarinet, due to its cylindrical bore and single reed, naturally emphasizes odd-numbered harmonics while minimizing even-numbered ones, creating the mathematical relationships that give clarinet tone its distinctive hollow, woody quality. These spectral differences aren't arbitrary timbral variations, but rather precise, mathematical consequences of how different physical systems vibrate and transfer energy to the surrounding air. The human voice represents perhaps the most complex and mathematically sophisticated acoustic instrument, capable of creating incredibly intricate harmonic spectra through the precise coordination of multiple resonant cavities. When an opera singer produces a powerful high note that seems to fill an entire concert hall, they're actually creating a mathematical masterpiece, a complex waveform containing dozens of precisely controlled frequency components that combine according to Fourier's mathematical principles to create both the fundamental pitch and the rich harmonic content that gives the voice its emotional power and acoustic projection. Modern audio technology relies entirely on Fourier transform mathematics to capture, store, and reproduce musical sound. When you listen to digital music on your phone or computer, you're hearing the mathematical reconstruction of waveforms that were originally decomposed into their frequency components, converted to digital numbers, stored as mathematical data, and then reconstructed through the inverse Fourier transform process. This mathematical round trip from waveform to frequency domain and back to waveform happens millions of times per second, with such precision that the reconstructed sound is mathematically indistinguishable from the original. Electronic synthesizers demonstrate Fourier principles in action by allowing musicians to build complex timbres from simple mathematical building blocks. Additive synthesis works by combining multiple sine wave oscillators at different frequencies and amplitudes, essentially performing real-time Fourier synthesis to create whatever harmonic spectrum the musician desires. This mathematical approach to sound creation allows electronic musicians to explore timbral possibilities that extend far beyond what any acoustic instrument could produce, creating sounds with mathematical precision that would be impossible to achieve through traditional mechanical vibration. Spectral music composition takes Fourier analysis as its primary compositional tool, with composers like Gerard Grisi and Tristan Murail using mathematical frequency analysis to determine harmonic and melodic content. These composers analyze the harmonic spectra of acoustic sounds, then use those mathematical relationships as raw material for composition, creating music where Fourier transforms become compositional algorithms that generate harmonic progressions, melodic lines, and even rhythmic patterns based on the mathematical relationships found within natural acoustic spectra. The Fourier transform's musical magic reveals how mathematical analysis can unveil hidden structures within seemingly simple musical phenomena, showing us that every sound we hear is actually a complex mathematical calculation performed by our auditory system, decomposing acoustic waveforms into their frequency components and reassembling them into the rich, meaningful musical experiences that connect mathematics to emotion through the extraordinary mathematical processing power of human hearing and perception. Beneath every musical performance lies an invisible mathematical compromise that most listeners never notice, but that profoundly shapes the emotional character of everything they hear. This is the mathematics of tuning systems, the different ways that cultures and historical periods have solved the fundamental mathematical problem of dividing the octave into usable musical intervals. When you hear a piano, guitar, or any other instrument, you're listening to one particular mathematical solution to a problem that has puzzled musicians and mathematicians for thousands of years: how to create a tuning system that allows musicians to play in multiple keys while maintaining reasonable harmonic purity in the intervals they use most frequently. The mathematical challenge arises from a fundamental incompatibility between different types of musical intervals that sound pleasing to the human ear. Perfect octaves require a precise 2-to-1 frequency ratio, perfect fifths sound best at a 3-to-2 ratio, and major thirds are most harmonious at a 5-to-3 ratio 4 ratio. These ratios create what musicians call just intonation, a tuning system where each interval uses the mathematically pure frequency relationships that create the strongest harmonic resonance. The problem emerges when you try to combine all these pure ratios into a complete tuning system that works for complex music, because the mathematical relationships don't align perfectly, creating what's known as the comma problem. Tiny mathematical discrepancies that accumulate and eventually make certain combinations of intervals sound unacceptably out of tune. Equal temperament, the mathematical compromise used by most modern Western instruments, solves this problem through elegant mathematical brute force. Instead of using the pure ratios that create perfect harmonic resonance, equal temperament divides the octave into 12 mathematically equal intervals, with each semitone representing the same frequency ratio, the 12th root of 2, or approximately 1.059463. This mathematical solution ensures that every interval maintains the same mathematical relationship regardless of which key you're playing in, allowing musicians to transpose freely between different tonal centers without encountering the mathematical inconsistencies that plague other tuning systems. The mathematical beauty of equal temperament comes with a subtle but significant cost. Every interval except the octave is slightly mathematically impure compared to just intonation ratios. A tempered perfect fifth uses a ratio of approximately 1.498307, while a pure perfect fifth requires exactly 1.5. This mathematical difference is small, less than 2 cents, or about 0.1%. But it's audible to sensitive ears and creates a different harmonic character than pure intervals. The major third in equal temperament deviates even more significantly from just intonation, creating a mathematical compromise that early musicians found quite jarring when equal temperament was first introduced. Historical tuning systems demonstrate different mathematical approaches to this fundamental problem. Pythagorean tuning, developed in ancient Greece, prioritizes mathematically pure perfect fifths, creating a system where fifths sound perfectly in tune, but major thirds become mathematically wide and harmonically unstable. Mean tone temperament, popular during the Renaissance and Baroque periods, takes the opposite mathematical approach, creating pure major thirds at the expense of perfect fifths, resulting in beautiful harmonic resonance in certain keys but mathematical chaos in others. Well-temperament systems, including the tuning system Bach probably used when he composed the Well-Tempered Clavier, represent mathematical compromise solutions that distribute the comma discrepancies unevenly across different keys. These systems create a mathematical landscape where each key has its own distinctive harmonic character. Some keys sound bright and pure, others have a slightly melancholic or mysterious quality, and still others possess a restless, unstable character that composers could exploit for expressive purposes. This mathematical variety gives well-tempered music a harmonic richness and key-specific character that equal temperament's mathematical uniformity tends to eliminate. Non-Western musical cultures have developed entirely different mathematical approaches to tuning that reflect both acoustic principles and cultural values. Arabic maqam music uses microtonal intervals that divide certain semitones into mathematically smaller units, creating melodic inflections that can convey specific emotional qualities impossible to achieve in 12-tone equal temperament. Indian classical music employs Shruti systems that recognize mathematical interval relationships much smaller than semitones, allowing for incredibly subtle mathematical adjustments to pitch that create different emotional colors within individual ragas. Just intonation continues to fascinate composers and music theorists who are willing to accept its mathematical limitations in exchange for the pure harmonic resonance it provides. Modern technology has made it possible to explore just intonation tuning with unprecedented mathematical precision, using electronic instruments that can maintain exact frequency ratios without the mechanical constraints that made pure intonation impractical for traditional keyboard instruments. The mathematics of tuning systems reveals how numerical relationships shape musical expression in fundamental ways, creating mathematical frameworks that determine not just how music sounds, but how it feels emotionally, demonstrating that tuning choices are never purely technical decisions, but rather mathematical philosophies that reflect cultural values about the balance between harmonic purity, practical flexibility, and expressive possibility. There's something beautifully mysterious about the way your brain transforms the linear, mathematical world of sound waves into the curved, subjective landscape of musical perception. When sound waves double in frequency, a perfectly linear mathematical relationship, you don't hear twice as much pitch, but rather the elegant musical interval of an octave, which feels like the same note at a higher level rather than a completely different sound. This transformation reveals one of the most profound mathematical principles governing human perception. Your auditory system processes frequency relationships logarithmically, creating a curved mathematical mapping between the physical world of vibrations and the psychological world of musical experience. Logarithmic perception means that equal ratios of frequency create equal intervals of perceived pitch, regardless of the absolute frequencies involved. The mathematical relationship between 100 Hz and 200 Hz, a 2-to-1 ratio, sounds like the same musical interval as the relationship between 400 Hz and 800 Hz, also a 2-to-1 ratio, even though the absolute frequency differences are 100 Hz in the first case and 400 Hz in the second. Your brain automatically performs logarithmic calculations that convert these different absolute frequency changes into the same perceived interval, an octave. This mathematical transformation is so fundamental to auditory processing that it operates completely below the threshold of conscious awareness, creating the basic perceptual framework within which all musical experience occurs. The mathematics of loudness perception follows similar logarithmic principles through the decibel scale, which measures sound intensity using logarithmic relationships rather than linear ones. When sound intensity doubles, a linear increase in acoustic energy, you don't perceive twice as much loudness, but rather an increase of approximately 3 decibels, which corresponds to a barely noticeable difference in perceived volume. This logarithmic compression allows your auditory system to handle the enormous range of sound intensities you encounter in daily life, from the barely audible rustle of leaves to the overwhelming roar of jet engines, mapping this vast range of physical intensities onto a manageable perceptual scale. The Weber-Fechner law, one of the foundational principles of psychophysics, describes this logarithmic relationship between physical stimulus and psychological perception with mathematical precision. Named after the German scientists Ernst Weber and Gustav Fechner, this law states that perceived intensity increases proportionally to the logarithm of actual stimulus intensity. In musical terms, this means that the mathematical relationships between frequencies determine musical intervals more than the absolute frequencies themselves, explaining why octaves feel equivalent regardless of their position in the frequency spectrum, and why musical scales maintain their character when transposed to different pitch levels. This logarithmic mathematics explains why musical scales are constructed from frequency ratios rather than absolute frequency differences. The mathematical relationship between C and C sharp remains constant, whether you're playing in the bass register or the treble register, because your brain processes the ratio between their frequencies rather than the absolute difference. A semitone always represents the same mathematical ratio, the 12th root of 2, regardless of which octave you're in, creating the perceptual consistency that makes musical transposition possible and meaningful. The spiral structure of pitch perception reflects this logarithmic mathematics in fascinating ways. Psychologists have discovered that pitch perception follows a helical pattern, where octaves feel related but not identical, like climbing a spiral staircase where each level resembles the previous one but occupies a different vertical position. This mathematical structure explains why octave equivalence feels so natural, while also accounting for the subtle, perceptual differences between notes in different octave ranges. The logarithmic spacing of this perceptual helix matches the mathematical spacing of frequency ratios, creating a beautiful correspondence between mathematical structure and psychological experience. Logarithmic perception also governs how you experience rhythm and tempo relationships. When a piece of music doubles in tempo, say, from 60 beats per minute to 120 beats per minute, you don't perceive twice as much speed, but rather a specific rhythmic transformation that maintains musical character while changing energy level. This logarithmic processing allows musicians to use tempo relationships as expressive tools, creating mathematical relationships between different sections of music that feel proportionally related rather than simply faster or slower. The mathematics of equal temperament tuning relies on logarithmic spacing to create the perceptual equality between semitones. Each semitone in equal temperament represents the same logarithmic step up the frequency spectrum, the 12th root of 2, ensuring that every half step feels like the same musical distance regardless of its absolute frequency position. This mathematical uniformity creates the perceptual consistency that makes equal temperament tuning so practical for complex harmonic music. Modern digital audio processing uses logarithmic mathematics extensively to match human perceptual characteristics. Digital equalizers often use logarithmic frequency spacing that mirrors auditory perception, and volume controls typically follow logarithmic curves that create perceptually linear changes in loudness. These technological applications of logarithmic mathematics ensure that digital audio tools behave in ways that feel natural and intuitive to human users. The gentle curves of logarithmic perception reveal how your brain performs sophisticated mathematical transformations that convert the linear physical world into the curved perceptual landscape of musical experience, creating the mathematical foundation that makes musical relationships feel natural, proportional, and emotionally meaningful across the vast range of frequencies and intensities that comprise the sonic world. Every time you listen to music in a room, you're experiencing a mathematical symphony created not just by the instruments, but by the invisible acoustic calculations that the space itself performs with every sound wave. The walls, ceiling, floor, and even the furniture around you become mathematical participants in the musical experience, reflecting, absorbing, and transforming sound waves according to precise geometric principles that can dramatically alter how music feels and sounds. This is the hidden mathematics of room acoustics, where the physical dimensions and surface properties of spaces create their own mathematical signatures that become as much a part of the musical experience as the notes themselves. When sound leaves a musical instrument, it doesn't simply travel in a straight line to your ears, but instead embarks on a complex mathematical journey that involves countless reflections, diffractions, and interferences as it bounces around the listening space. Each surface it encounters, whether a hard wall, a soft curtain, or an irregular bookshelf, performs its own mathematical transformation on the sound wave, changing its amplitude, frequency content, and arrival time according to the mathematical principles that govern wave behavior. The result is that what reaches your ears is not just the direct sound from the instruments, but a mathematically complex mixture of the original sound plus dozens of reflected versions, each arriving at slightly different times and with slightly different mathematical characteristics. The mathematical concept of reverberation time demonstrates how room acoustics can be quantified with remarkable precision. Acousticians measure how long it takes for a sound to decay by 60 decibels after the source stops producing it, creating a mathematical parameter called RT60 that characterizes a room's acoustic behavior. A concert hall might have an RT60 of 1.8 seconds, meaning that mathematical decay processes in that space create a rich, sustained acoustic environment that enhances the perception of musical blend and grandeur. A recording studio might target an RT60 of 0.4 seconds, creating mathematical conditions that minimize reflected sound and allow for precise capture of direct instrumental tone. Standing wave patterns reveal how room dimensions create mathematical resonances that can dramatically affect musical perception. When the wavelength of a sound wave relates mathematically to room dimensions, constructive and destructive interference patterns create points in the space where certain frequencies are amplified or cancelled. A room that's 10 feet long will create a standing wave pattern for frequencies around 56 Hz, potentially causing bass notes near that frequency to sound unnaturally loud or quiet depending on where you're sitting. These mathematical relationships between wavelength and room dimensions explain why the same piece of music can sound dramatically different when played in different spaces. The mathematics of diffusion and scattering explain how irregular surfaces can break up coherent reflections and create more even sound distribution throughout a listening space. When sound waves encounter surfaces with mathematical irregularities, perhaps bookshelves with random arrangements of books, or acoustic panels with mathematically designed surface patterns, the reflected energy gets scattered in multiple directions rather than creating strong, coherent echoes. This mathematical dispersion of reflected energy contributes to acoustic environments that feel more natural and less fatiguing to listen to over extended periods. Absorption coefficients provide mathematical descriptions of how different materials interact with sound waves across the frequency spectrum. A thick carpet might absorb 80% of high-frequency energy, while absorbing only 20% of low-frequency energy, creating mathematical filtering effects that emphasize certain aspects of musical timbre while suppressing others. Concert hall designers use these mathematical relationships to create acoustic environments that enhance specific aspects of musical performance, perhaps emphasizing the clarity of individual instrumental lines, or creating the rich harmonic blend that makes orchestral music sound magnificent. The mathematical principles of geometric acoustics allow architects and acousticians to predict how sound will behave in spaces before they're even built. By applying mathematical ray tracing techniques similar to those used in computer graphics, designers can calculate how sound waves will reflect off proposed architectural surfaces, identifying potential acoustic problems and optimizing room shapes for specific musical purposes. These mathematical models have become so sophisticated that they can predict listening experiences with remarkable accuracy, allowing the creation of acoustic environments tailored to specific musical repertoires or performance styles. Digital reverb algorithms demonstrate how mathematical models of room acoustics can be used to recreate the sound of any space imaginable. By calculating the mathematical relationships between room dimensions, surface properties, and sound wave behavior, these algorithms can simulate everything from the intimate acoustics of a small jazz club to the vast reverberation of a cathedral. The mathematical precision of these simulations has become so advanced that digital recreations of acoustic spaces can be virtually indistinguishable from the original rooms they model. The mathematics of room acoustics reveals how physical space becomes an active mathematical participant in musical experience, performing complex calculations with every sound wave that transforms simple, musical sounds into rich, spatially enhanced acoustic experiences. Understanding these mathematical relationships helps explain why the same performance can feel completely different in different rooms, and why the acoustic environment is as crucial to musical experience as the musical performance itself, creating mathematical partnerships between space and sound that shape every aspect of how music moves from instruments to hearts through the invisible mathematical medium of architectural acoustics. In the gentle transition from analog to digital, music underwent one of the most profound mathematical transformations in human history, the conversion of continuous sound waves into discrete numbers, transforming the flowing curves of acoustic vibrations into the precise mathematical language of binary code. When you listen to music on your phone, computer, or any digital device, you're experiencing the remarkable mathematical miracle by which millions of ones and zeros become the songs that move your heart. This digital transformation represents not just a technological advancement, but a fundamental mathematical reimagining of how sound can be captured, stored, and reproduced with extraordinary fidelity through the elegant precision of numerical representation. The mathematical foundation of digital audio begins with the sampling theorem, a beautiful principle discovered by Harry Nyquist and Claude Shannon that establishes the mathematical conditions under which continuous analog signals can be perfectly reconstructed from discrete digital samples. This theorem states that if you measure the amplitude of a sound wave at regular intervals that occur at least twice as fast as the highest frequency you want to capture, you can mathematically reconstruct the original continuous waveform with perfect accuracy. For music, this typically means sampling at 44,100 times per second, a rate that captures frequencies up to about 22,000 Hz, which encompasses the full range of human hearing with mathematical precision. Each digital sample represents a mathematical snapshot of the sound wave's amplitude at a specific moment in time, measured with extraordinary precision and converted into binary numbers that can be stored, transmitted, and processed by computers. A typical digital audio file might use 16-bit samples, meaning each amplitude measurement is represented by a 16-digit binary number that can express 65,536 different amplitude levels. This mathematical resolution is fine enough that the discrete steps between adjacent amplitude levels are far smaller than the human ear can detect, creating the mathematical illusion of continuous sound from what is actually a series of precisely spaced numerical measurements. The mathematics of digital to analog conversion reveals how these numerical representations are transformed back into the continuous sound waves that reach your ears. Digital to analog converters perform mathematical interpolation between the discrete sample points using algorithms that calculate the most likely continuous curve that would pass through all the measured points. This mathematical reconstruction process can be so precise that the resulting analog signal is virtually indistinguishable from the original continuous waveform, demonstrating how mathematical theory can bridge the gap between discrete numerical representation and continuous physical reality. Digital audio compression introduces additional mathematical sophistication that allows enormous amounts of musical information to be stored and transmitted efficiently. Algorithms like MP3 encoding use mathematical models of human auditory perception to identify which parts of the audio signal can be mathematically removed without significantly affecting the listening experience. These perceptual coding techniques apply mathematical analysis that determines which frequency components are likely to be masked by other louder sounds, which temporal details fall below the threshold of auditory perception, and which spectral information can be mathematically approximated rather than precisely preserved. The mathematical elegance of digital audio becomes apparent in the way it enables perfect copying and manipulation without quality loss. Unlike analog recording systems, where each copy introduces additional noise and distortion, digital audio can be copied infinite times with mathematical exactness because numbers can be replicated with perfect precision. This mathematical property has revolutionized music production, allowing complex multi-track recordings to be assembled from mathematically perfect copies of individual performances, enabling creative possibilities that would have been impossible in the analog domain. digital signal processing opens entirely new mathematical possibilities for musical creation and manipulation. Mathematical operations like filtering, time stretching, pitch shifting, and spectral analysis can be applied to digital audio with surgical precision, using algorithms that perform complex mathematical calculations on the numerical representations of sound. These mathematical transformations can create effects and manipulations that would be impossible to achieve with analog processing, allowing musicians and producers to explore sonic territories that exist only in the mathematical realm of digital computation. The mathematical precision of digital audio has also enabled new forms of musical analysis and visualization. Software can perform mathematical operations like Fourier transforms on digital audio in real time, revealing the frequency content and harmonic structure of music with unprecedented detail and accuracy. These mathematical tools allow musicians, researchers, and listeners to explore musical structure at levels of mathematical detail that were unimaginable before digital technology made such precise numerical analysis possible. Error correction algorithms demonstrate how mathematical redundancy can ensure perfect digital audio reproduction even in the presence of data corruption. Compact discs use mathematical codes that allow the detection and correction of errors in the digital data, ensuring that occasional scratches or imperfections don't affect the audio quality. These mathematical error correction systems apply sophisticated algebraic principles to detect when binary data has been corrupted and to reconstruct the original numbers with mathematical certainty. The binary poetry of digital music reveals how abstract mathematical concepts can preserve and transmit the most emotionally moving aspects of human musical expression, transforming the continuous flow of acoustic energy into discrete numerical precision while maintaining the essential musical qualities that make digital recordings indistinguishable from live performance, creating mathematical bridges between the analog world of human perception and the digital realm of computational precision. In the realm of electronic music, composers and sound designers have discovered that they can create entire orchestras from pure mathematics, building complex musical timbres from nothing more than mathematical functions and algorithms that generate sound waves according to precise numerical formulas. This is the art of synthesis, the mathematical transformation of abstract equations into musical expression, where oscillators become mathematical tone generators, filters become frequency-selective mathematical operations, and envelopes become time-varying mathematical functions that shape sound with the precision of calculus and the creativity of musical imagination. The foundation of synthesis lies in the mathematical concept of the oscillator, a function that generates periodic waveforms by calculating mathematical relationships between time and amplitude. A sine wave oscillator computes the trigonometric sine function thousands of times per second, creating the mathematically pure waveform that contains only a single frequency component with no harmonic content. Square wave oscillators generate mathematical waveforms that alternate between maximum positive and negative values, creating rich harmonic spectra that emphasize odd-numbered overtones, according to the mathematical principles of Fourier analysis. Sawtooth oscillators create linearly ascending mathematical ramps that contain all harmonic frequencies in mathematically precise amplitude relationships. Subtractive synthesis demonstrates how mathematical filtering can sculpt complex harmonic spectra into musically useful sounds. Starting with harmonically rich waveforms generated by mathematical oscillators, filters apply mathematical operations that selectively remove or emphasize certain frequency components according to various mathematical curves and response characteristics. A low-pass filter might use mathematical algorithms that gradually attenuate frequencies above a cutoff point, creating the mathematical effect of removing brightness from a sound. High-pass filters perform the mathematical inverse, removing low frequencies while preserving high-frequency content, creating sounds that feel thinner and more focused. The mathematics of filter resonance adds harmonic emphasis at the cutoff frequency, creating mathematical peak responses that can make synthesized sounds feel more alive and responsive. When resonance settings approach mathematical instability, filters can begin to self-oscillate, generating their own sinusoidal tones at the cutoff frequency and transforming from passive mathematical operations into active tone generators. This mathematical behavior allows synthesis to create sounds that transition smoothly between filtered noise and pure tones, exploring the mathematical continuum between harmonic complexity and spectral simplicity. Envelopes apply mathematical curves that control how synthesis parameters change over time, creating the temporal shaping that gives synthesized sounds their musical expressiveness. An ADSR envelope, attack, decay, sustain, release, uses mathematical functions to control how amplitude evolves from the moment a key is pressed until it's released and the sound fades to silence. These mathematical time functions can be applied not just to amplitude but to any synthesis parameter, creating complex temporal behaviors where filter cutoff frequencies, oscillator pitches, and modulation depths all follow carefully crafted mathematical trajectories that unfold over time. Frequency modulation synthesis reveals how mathematical relationships between oscillators can create incredibly complex harmonic spectra from simple mathematical building blocks. When one oscillator's output is used to mathematically modulate another oscillator's frequency, the resulting mathematical interactions generate sidebands, additional frequency components that appear at mathematically predictable intervals around the carrier frequency. The mathematical relationships between carrier and modulator frequencies determine the harmonic content of the resulting sound, allowing synthesis to create everything from bell-like tones to complex metallic textures using purely mathematical relationships between simple sine wave oscillators. Additive synthesis takes the mathematical approach of building complex timbres by combining multiple sine wave oscillators, each contributing a single mathematical frequency component to the overall harmonic spectrum. This technique essentially performs real-time Fourier synthesis, allowing complete mathematical control over every aspect of the harmonic content. By precisely controlling the amplitude and frequency of dozens or even hundreds of individual sine wave oscillators, additive synthesis can mathematically recreate the harmonic spectra of acoustic instruments, or create entirely new timbres that exist only in the mathematical realm of electronic sound generation. Granular synthesis demonstrates how mathematical manipulation of tiny sound fragments can create vast sonic textures that seem to transcend their mathematical origins. By chopping continuous sounds into mathematical grains lasting just a few milliseconds, then mathematically repositioning, time-stretching, and pitch-shifting these grains, according to algorithmic rules, granular synthesis can create everything from realistic instrumental simulations to abstract soundscapes that seem to exist in multiple temporal dimensions simultaneously. Modern digital synthesizers combine multiple mathematical synthesis techniques in sophisticated architectures that allow virtually unlimited mathematical complexity while remaining musically intuitive to operate. These instruments demonstrate how advanced mathematical concepts can be made accessible to musicians who may have no formal mathematical training, creating user interfaces that translate musical intentions into complex mathematical operations seamlessly and transparently. The mathematical orchestra of synthesis reveals how pure mathematical relationships can become emotionally expressive musical instruments, transforming abstract numerical concepts into sounds that can move hearts and inspire creativity, demonstrating that mathematics and musical expression are not opposing forces but rather complementary aspects of the same fundamental human drive to create meaning and beauty through pattern, relationship, and the endless mathematical possibilities that emerge when numbers become music. There's something beautifully paradoxical about the way musical creativity can emerge from the marriage of mathematical precision and controlled randomness, where composers and algorithms collaborate to explore musical territories that neither pure calculation nor pure chance could discover alone. This is the fascinating realm where mathematical chaos theory meets musical composition, where random number generators become compositional tools, and where the delicate balance between order and disorder creates musical textures that feel both inevitable and surprising, demonstrating how mathematical randomness can become a pathway to musical meaning, rather than an obstacle to coherent expression. Mathematical approaches to musical randomness began with composers like John Cage, who used chance operations derived from the ancient Chinese Wu Qing to make compositional decisions that removed personal preference from the creative process. By consulting mathematical charts and random procedures, Cage created music where every parameter, pitch, rhythm, dynamics, even instrument choice, was determined by mathematical chance rather than traditional musical logic. This mathematical approach to composition revealed how randomness could create musical relationships that human composers might never have imagined, opening up vast territories of musical possibility that lay beyond the boundaries of conventional musical thinking. Algorithmic composition demonstrates how mathematical rules can generate musical complexity from simple initial conditions, following principles similar to those found in chaos theory and complex systems. A composer might create a mathematical algorithm that generates melodies by applying simple transformation rules to an initial musical seed, perhaps transposing each note by a mathematical interval determined by the previous note's pitch, or creating rhythmic patterns based on mathematical sequences like the Fibonacci series. These mathematical procedures can generate musical material with internal coherence and development that feels purposeful despite emerging from purely mechanical mathematical processes. Stochastic music, pioneered by composers like Yannis Xenakis, applies statistical mathematics to control large-scale musical textures, where individual events might be random, but overall statistical properties create coherent musical shapes. Instead of controlling every individual note, stochastic composition uses mathematical probability distributions to determine the likelihood of various musical events, perhaps specifying that high notes should occur more frequently than low notes, or that loud dynamics should be statistically correlated with dense textures. This mathematical approach allows composers to create music where local randomness serves larger structural purposes. Cellular automata and other mathematical systems demonstrate how simple mathematical rules can generate complex musical behaviors that exhibit characteristics of both order and chaos. Conway's Game of Life, a mathematical system where cells evolve according to simple rules about their neighbours, has been adapted for musical composition where each cell represents a musical event, and the mathematical evolution rules determine how musical patterns develop over time. These mathematical systems can create musical textures that feel organic and alive, while remaining completely deterministic and mathematically predictable. Fractional randomness and pink noise introduce mathematical concepts that bridge the gap between pure randomness and complete predictability. While white noise contains equal mathematical energy at all frequencies and sounds completely chaotic, pink noise has a mathematical structure where lower frequencies have more energy than higher frequencies, creating random textures that feel more natural and less harsh. Musical applications of fractional noise can create melodic and rhythmic patterns that have random characteristics, but still feel musically coherent and aesthetically pleasing. Chaos mathematics reveals how deterministic systems can produce behaviors that appear random despite following precise mathematical rules. Musical applications of chaos theory use mathematical equations like the logistic map or Lorenz attractor to generate sequences of numbers that have statistical properties similar to randomness, but emerge from completely deterministic mathematical processes. These chaotic mathematical systems can create musical materials that balance unpredictability with underlying mathematical structure, generating compositions that feel spontaneous while maintaining hidden mathematical coherence. Machine learning and artificial intelligence introduce new forms of mathematical creativity, where algorithms learn statistical patterns from existing musical data and then generate new musical material that exhibits similar mathematical characteristics. Neural networks trained on Bach chorales can compose new pieces that sound stylistically authentic, while containing harmonic and melodic relationships that never appeared in the original training data. These mathematical approaches to composition demonstrate how algorithms can discover and apply musical patterns that exist at levels of mathematical complexity beyond conscious human analysis. Interactive algorithmic systems create mathematical partnerships between human performers and computer algorithms, where live musical input influences mathematical processes that generate responsive musical output. These systems can create musical experiences where human creativity and mathematical creativity interact in real time, producing musical results that neither human nor algorithm could achieve independently. The mathematical responsiveness of these systems can create the impression of musical dialogue between human and machine intelligence. The mathematical exploration of chance and chaos in music reveals how controlled randomness can become a compositional tool that expands rather than limits musical expression, showing how mathematical approaches to unpredictability can create musical textures and relationships that feel both surprising and inevitable, demonstrating that the boundary between mathematical calculation and musical inspiration might be more fluid and collaborative than traditional approaches to composition would suggest. Opening new territories where mathematical precision and creative intuition combine, to explore the infinite possibilities that emerge when numbers dance with musical imagination. There's something deeply mysterious about the way certain mathematical relationships between frequencies can reach directly into your emotional core and rearrange your feelings without your conscious permission. When you hear a minor chord shift to a major chord, when a melody leaps upward by a perfect fifth, when a rhythm syncopates against your expectations, you're experiencing mathematical relationships that somehow translate into joy, sadness, tension, or release through pathways that connect abstract numerical ratios to the most intimate aspects of human emotional experience. This is perhaps the most profound mystery in all of music, how mathematical precision becomes emotional truth, how frequency relationships become feelings, and how the cold calculations of acoustic physics transform into the warm language of the heart. The mathematical basis of musical tension and resolution lies in the way your brain processes harmonic relationships and predicts musical outcomes based on statistical patterns learned from a lifetime of musical exposure. When you hear a dominant seventh chord, your auditory system recognizes the mathematical instability created by the tritone interval, a frequency ratio of approximately 1.414 that sits uncomfortably between simple harmonic ratios, creating acoustic beating and harmonic roughness that your brain interprets as musical tension requiring resolution. This mathematical dissonance creates a psychological expectation for harmonic movement that feels emotionally urgent, demonstrating how mathematical relationships can create genuine emotional states. Melodic intervals trigger emotional responses through mathematical relationships that seem to bypass rational thought entirely. The mathematical ratio of a minor second, approximately 16 to 15, creates frequency relationships so close together that they generate acoustic beating patterns that many listeners find emotionally unsettling or poignant. A perfect fourth, with its 4 to 3 mathematical ratio, often evokes feelings of openness or questioning, while a major sixth at a 5 to 3 ratio frequently creates impressions of longing or sweetness. These emotional associations appear to be partly universal and partly culturally learned, suggesting that mathematical relationships interact with both biological and social factors in creating emotional meaning. The mathematics of expectation and surprise in music reveals how your brain constantly performs statistical calculations about probable musical outcomes based on the patterns it has learned to associate with different musical styles and contexts. When a melody follows predictable mathematical patterns, perhaps ascending stepwise through a scale, your brain develops mathematical expectations about where the melody is likely to go next. Composers can create emotional impact by either fulfilling these mathematical expectations, creating satisfaction and resolution, or violating them in carefully calculated ways, creating surprise, humor, or dramatic tension. Rhythm's mathematical relationship to emotion appears to connect musical pulse to fundamental biological rhythms that govern everything from heartbeat to breathing to brainwave patterns. When musical rhythms align mathematically with your natural physiological rhythms, they can create feelings of comfort and entrainment. When they conflict with biological timing, they can generate excitement, anxiety, or disorientation. The mathematical precision of rhythmic relationships allows composers to create emotional effects by either supporting or disrupting the mathematical patterns that govern your body's internal rhythmic processes. Harmonic rhythm, the mathematical rate at which chord changes occur, creates another layer of emotional effect through temporal mathematical relationships. Slow harmonic rhythm, where chords change infrequently, can create feelings of stability and contemplation, while rapid harmonic rhythm generates excitement and forward momentum. The mathematical relationship between harmonic rhythm and melodic rhythm creates complex emotional textures where multiple temporal layers interact to create sophisticated psychological effects that operate largely below the threshold of conscious awareness. The mathematical principles governing musical dynamics and loudness create emotional effects through relationships that mirror patterns found in human speech and emotional expression. Gradual mathematical increases in volume, crescendo, often create feelings of building excitement or approaching climax, while sudden mathematical changes in dynamics can create surprise, drama, or emphasis. These mathematical relationships between amplitude and emotion appear to be deeply connected to the way humans naturally use vocal dynamics to express emotional states in speech and other forms of vocal communication. Timbre's mathematical relationship to emotion operates through the complex frequency spectra that give different instruments their distinctive harmonic signatures. The mathematical harmonic content of a violin's tone, rich in even-numbered harmonics with specific mathematical amplitude relationships, tends to evoke emotional associations that differ systematically from those created by a clarinet's spectrum, which emphasizes odd harmonics in different mathematical proportions. These spectral differences create emotional colorings that composers can use to enhance the emotional content of musical passages. Cultural factors interact with mathematical relationships to create learned emotional associations that can override or modify the more universal emotional effects of acoustic mathematics. A particular scale or harmonic progression might have specific emotional connotations within one musical culture that differ completely from its emotional associations in another culture, demonstrating how social learning and mathematical acoustics collaborate to create the complex emotional languages that different musical traditions use to express and communicate feeling. The mathematics of musical emotion reveals how abstract numerical relationships become the raw material for humanity's most sophisticated emotional communication system, creating bridges between the objective world of acoustic physics and the subjective realm of feeling, demonstrating that mathematical precision and emotional truth are not opposites, but rather complementary aspects of music's extraordinary capacity to transform mathematical relationships into the language of the heart. Across the beautiful diversity of human cultures, mathematical relationships in music express themselves in countless different ways, creating distinct musical languages that reflect both universal acoustic principles and the unique mathematical choices that different societies have made about how to organize sound, rhythm, and musical meaning. While the fundamental mathematics of frequency ratios and harmonic relationships remain constant across all cultures, the ways that different musical traditions apply these mathematical principles create fascinating variations in how music sounds, feels, and communicates emotional content, demonstrating that mathematical universals can support infinite cultural creativity and expression. Indian classical music demonstrates perhaps the most mathematically sophisticated approach to microtonal organization, dividing the octave into 22 shrutis, mathematical intervals much smaller than the 12 semitones of Western music. These precise mathematical divisions allow Indian musicians to create melodic inflections and harmonic relationships that convey specific emotional qualities called rasas, where subtle mathematical adjustments to pitch can transform the entire emotional character of a musical phrase. The mathematical precision required to perform these microtonal relationships correctly demands years of training and extraordinary sensitivity to frequency relationships that most Western ears find difficult to perceive or reproduce. Arabic maqam traditions employ mathematical interval systems that include quarter tones and other microtonal relationships, creating melodic possibilities that exist between the keys of a piano. The mathematical ratios used in maqam music often derive from just intonation principles that create pure harmonic relationships, but they're applied to scales that include intervals like the three-quarter tone, approximately 150 cents instead of the 100-cent semitone, that give Arabic music its distinctive melodic character. These mathematical choices reflect cultural values about the expressive possibilities of pitch and the emotional significance of subtle frequency relationships that might seem mathematically insignificant to ears trained in other musical traditions. Gamelan music from Indonesia reveals how mathematical relationships can be applied to create entirely different approaches to harmony and tuning. The Slendro and Pelog scales used in gamelan divide the octave according to mathematical principles that don't align with Western 12-tone equal temperament, creating harmonic relationships that sound exotic to Western ears, but follow their own internal mathematical logic. The mathematical ratios used in gamelan tuning vary slightly from ensemble to ensemble, creating subtle mathematical differences that give each gamelan orchestra its own distinctive harmonic personality and tonal character. African polyrhythmic traditions demonstrate mathematical approaches to rhythm that create complex temporal relationships between multiple simultaneous pulse streams. Where Western music often emphasizes mathematical relationships based on powers of 2, 2/4, 4/4, 8/8 time signatures, many African musical traditions use mathematical relationships based on 3, 5, 7, or other numbers that create polyrhythmic textures where different mathematical cycles overlap and interact. These mathematical relationships create rhythmic complexity that can feel both highly organized and spontaneously flowing, demonstrating how different mathematical approaches to time division can create distinctly different rhythmic vocabularies. Chinese classical music employs mathematical relationships in its tuning systems that reflect philosophical principles about cosmic harmony and mathematical proportion. The traditional Chinese 12-lu system uses mathematical ratios derived from cycles of perfect fifths, creating tuning relationships that were believed to mirror mathematical principles governing the natural world. These mathematical choices connect musical practice to broader cultural ideas about mathematics, nature, and cosmic order, demonstrating how tuning systems can embody cultural values about the relationship between mathematical precision and spiritual meaning. Celtic and other folk traditions often use mathematical relationships in their modal scales that create harmonic flavors distinct from major and minor tonalities. The mathematical intervals that define modes like Dorian, Mixolydian, and Phrygian create specific emotional characters that Celtic musicians have used for centuries to evoke particular moods and tell specific types of stories. These mathematical choices in scale construction create harmonic vocabularies that feel both ancient and timeless, connecting contemporary performances to mathematical relationships that have been passed down through generations of traditional musicians. Jazz harmony demonstrates how cultural evolution can create new mathematical relationships and chord structures that expand the harmonic possibilities available to musicians. The mathematical complexity of jazz chord progressions, with their extended harmonies, altered dominants, and sophisticated voice-leading principles, represents a cultural development of Western harmonic mathematics that creates emotional and expressive possibilities that weren't available in earlier musical periods. This mathematical evolution continues as jazz musicians discover new harmonic relationships and develop new mathematical approaches to improvisation and composition. Electronic music cultures have created entirely new mathematical possibilities for musical expression through digital synthesis and computer-based composition techniques. These technological musical cultures can explore mathematical relationships that would be impossible to achieve with acoustic instruments, creating new musical languages based on mathematical principles that exist only in the digital domain. These emerging musical cultures demonstrate how technological capabilities can enable new forms of mathematical musical expression that expand the boundaries of what's possible in human musical communication. The mathematical diversity found in world music traditions reveals how universal acoustic principles can support infinite cultural creativity, showing that, while the fundamental mathematics of sound remains constant, the ways that human cultures choose to organize and apply these mathematical relationships create the rich diversity of musical languages that make global musical traditions so endlessly fascinating and emotionally compelling, demonstrating that mathematical precision and cultural expression work together to create the magnificent variety of ways that human beings transform numerical relationships into musical meaning. Deep within the ancient wisdom of healing traditions and the cutting-edge research of modern neuroscience lies a profound recognition that sound and music can serve as mathematical medicine, using precise frequency relationships and rhythmic patterns to influence physiological processes, emotional states, and even cellular function in ways that bridge the gap between acoustic physics and biological healing. When you listen to music that makes you feel more relaxed, energized, or emotionally balanced, you're experiencing the therapeutic applications of mathematical relationships that can measurably affect heart rate, brainwave patterns, hormone production, and immune system function through pathways that transform sound waves into healing vibrations. The mathematical principle of entrainment explains how external rhythmic patterns can synchronize with internal biological rhythms to create therapeutic effects that operate at the most fundamental levels of physiological function. When you listen to music with a steady beat around 60 beats per minute, close to a resting heart rate, your cardiovascular system tends to entrain to this mathematical rhythm, gradually slowing your heart rate and reducing blood pressure through purely acoustic means. This mathematical synchronization between external musical rhythm and internal biological rhythm demonstrates how carefully chosen frequency relationships can serve as non-invasive medical interventions that work through the mathematical principles governing rhythmic entrainment. Specific frequencies have been identified through research as having measurable therapeutic effects on various physiological systems. The mathematical frequency of 528 Hz, sometimes called the love frequency, has been associated with DNA repair and cellular regeneration in preliminary studies, though the mechanisms by which specific frequencies might influence molecular processes remain under investigation. The mathematical precision required for these frequency-specific effects suggests that therapeutic applications of sound might operate through resonance phenomena, where external vibrations interact with the natural resonant frequencies of biological structures at molecular, cellular, or organ system levels. Binaural beats demonstrate how mathematical relationships between slightly different frequencies can create neurological effects that influence brainwave patterns and consciousness states. When you listen to one frequency in your left ear and a slightly different frequency in your right ear, perhaps 440 Hz and 444 Hz, your brain creates a mathematical beat frequency at the difference between these tones, in this case 4 Hz. This mathematical beating pattern can entrain brainwave activity to specific frequency ranges associated with different states of consciousness, potentially inducing relaxation, focus, or meditative states through purely mathematical acoustic intervention. The mathematical structure of musical scales and harmonies has been used therapeutically across cultures for thousands of years, with different mathematical interval relationships believed to have specific healing properties. Ancient Greek physicians used specific mathematical ratios in music to treat various ailments, while traditional Chinese medicine incorporates musical therapy based on mathematical relationships between musical intervals and organ systems. Modern music therapy builds on these historical insights using scientific research to understand how mathematical harmonic relationships affect neurological function and emotional regulation. Sound healing practices often focus on mathematical relationships between fundamental frequencies and their harmonic overtones, using instruments like singing bowls, tuning forks, and crystal bowls that produce pure mathematical ratios believed to have therapeutic properties. The mathematical precision of these harmonic relationships creates acoustic environments where multiple frequencies interact according to mathematical principles that may influence biological systems through resonance, entrainment, or other mechanisms that researchers are still working to understand fully. The mathematical measurement of heart rate variability reveals how musical listening can influence the mathematical patterns of cardiovascular function in ways that correlate with improved health outcomes. When you listen to music that promotes relaxation, the mathematical variability in your heart rhythm often increases, creating more complex and adaptive cardiovascular patterns that are associated with better autonomic nervous system function and improved stress resilience. This demonstrates how musical mathematics can measurably improve the mathematical complexity of vital physiological processes. Rhythmic mathematical patterns in music therapy have been shown to help patients with neurological conditions like Parkinson's disease, where external rhythmic cues can help overcome disrupted internal timing mechanisms. The mathematical regularity of musical beats can provide temporal scaffolding that helps patients initiate and coordinate movement when their own neural timing systems are compromised. This therapeutic application demonstrates how mathematical precision in musical rhythm can compensate for neurological dysfunction through external mathematical organization. The mathematical frequency ranges associated with different brainwave states, alpha waves around 8 to 12 Hz, theta waves around 4 to 8 Hz, delta waves below 4 Hz, 4 Hz, can be influenced through musical listening that incorporates these mathematical relationships either directly or through entrainment mechanisms. Music designed to promote specific brainwave states uses mathematical principles to create acoustic environments that encourage particular patterns of neural activity associated with relaxation, creativity, healing, or restorative sleep. Modern research into the mathematical basis of music therapy continues to reveal new understanding of how acoustic mathematical relationships influence biological function, opening possibilities for precision medicine applications where specific mathematical frequency relationships could be prescribed like medications to address particular health conditions, demonstrating that the ancient intuition connecting music and healing reflects genuine mathematical relationships between acoustic physics and biological function that modern science is only beginning to understand and harness therapeutically. At the deepest levels of physical reality, where matter dissolves into probability waves and energy exists in discrete mathematical packets called quanta, fascinating parallels emerge between the mathematical principles governing quantum mechanics and the harmonic relationships that create musical beauty. While we must tread carefully in connecting these realms, quantum physics operates at scales far smaller than those relevant to musical acoustics. There are intriguing mathematical symmetries between the way energy levels quantize in atomic systems and the way musical frequencies organize themselves into harmonic series, suggesting that the mathematical elegance we find in music might reflect fundamental organizational principles that operate throughout nature. The concept of quantized energy levels in quantum mechanics bears a striking mathematical resemblance to the discrete frequency relationships found in musical harmony. Just as electrons in atoms can only occupy specific energy levels with mathematical precision, jumping between allowed states in discrete quantum leaps rather than sliding continuously, musical instruments tend to produce sounds at specific frequency relationships that create stable harmonic patterns. The mathematical intervals between these quantized states, whether in atomic physics or musical acoustics, often follow mathematical ratios that create patterns of stability and instability, resonance and discord that govern how energy organizes itself at every scale. Harmonic oscillators represent one of the most fundamental mathematical models in quantum mechanics, describing systems where restoring forces create periodic motion according to precise mathematical relationships. These same mathematical principles govern the vibration of musical strings, air columns in wind instruments, and the resonant cavities that give musical instruments their distinctive timbral characteristics. The mathematical equations that describe quantum harmonic oscillators are virtually identical to those that govern musical vibration, suggesting that the mathematical beauty of musical harmony might reflect universal principles about how oscillating systems organize themselves across all scales of physical reality. Wave-particle duality in quantum mechanics reveals mathematical relationships that parallel the way musical sounds can be understood, both as continuous waves traveling through space and as discrete particles of acoustic energy. Just as photons and electrons exhibit both wave-like and particle-like properties, depending on how they are observed and measured, musical sounds can be analyzed both as continuous pressure waves, with smooth mathematical curves, and as discrete frequency components with specific mathematical energy content. This mathematical duality suggests that our understanding of music as both flowing temporal experience and precise spectral analysis might reflect fundamental aspects of how reality itself organizes information and energy. The mathematical principle of superposition in quantum mechanics, where particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously until measurement forces them to choose a specific reality, finds musical parallels in the way complex musical timbres emerge from the mathematical superposition of multiple frequency components. When multiple sine waves combine according to mathematical principles of wave interference, they create complex waveforms that contain all the individual frequency components simultaneously, just as quantum superposition allows particles to exist in multiple mathematical states until observation collapses them into specific measured values. Resonance phenomena in quantum systems demonstrate mathematical relationships that govern how energy transfers between coupled oscillators, creating patterns of constructive and destructive interference that determine which quantum states are stable and which are unstable. These same mathematical principles operate in musical acoustics, where resonant coupling between different parts of musical instruments creates the complex spectral relationships that give each instrument its distinctive voice. The mathematical conditions for resonance appear to be universal, operating according to similar principles, whether we're discussing quantum field oscillations or the acoustic resonances that make music possible. Entanglement in quantum mechanics reveals mathematical correlations between particles that remain connected across arbitrary distances, maintaining mathematical relationships that seem to transcend classical limitations of space and time. While musical entanglement operates on much larger scales, there are intriguing parallels in the way harmonic relationships create mathematical connections between different frequency components that persist regardless of their temporal or spatial separation. The mathematical coherence of musical harmony creates acoustic relationships that maintain their mathematical integrity even when the individual frequency components are separated in time or space. The uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics establishes mathematical limits on how precisely we can simultaneously measure certain pairs of properties, creating fundamental mathematical constraints on information and measurement that might have parallels in musical perception. The mathematical trade-offs between temporal and spectral resolution in musical analysis, where precise timing information comes at the cost of frequency resolution and vice versa, mirror the mathematical structure of quantum uncertainty, suggesting that information processing limitations might reflect universal mathematical principles. Quantum field theory describes reality as consisting of mathematical fields that fill all of space, with particles emerging as mathematical excitations or resonances within these fields. This mathematical perspective on reality as fundamentally vibrational and resonant bears intriguing resemblances to musical thinking, where individual sounds emerge as temporary mathematical excitations within the broader mathematical field of acoustic possibility, creating temporary patterns of organized energy that arise from and return to the mathematical silence from which all musical possibility emerges. While the mathematical connections between quantum mechanics and musical mathematics remain largely speculative and metaphorical, they point toward the possibility that the mathematical principles governing musical beauty might reflect fundamental organizational patterns that operate throughout nature, from the quantum realm to cosmic scales, suggesting that our appreciation for mathematical harmony in music might connect us to mathematical truths that govern reality at its deepest levels. At the intersection of neuroscience and musical mathematics lies one of the most profound mysteries of human consciousness: how your brain transforms the mathematical relationships of sound waves into the rich, meaningful, and deeply emotional experience you call music. When you hear a melody that makes you nostalgic or a rhythm that makes you want to dance, your nervous system is performing incredibly sophisticated mathematical calculations that decode frequency relationships, temporal patterns, and harmonic structures, then somehow translate these numerical relationships into conscious experience, memory, emotion, and meaning through processes that represent some of the most complex mathematical computations your brain performs. The mathematical processing of musical information begins in your cochlea, where mechanical vibrations are converted into electrical signals through a biological process that functions like a living spectrum analyzer. Hair cells arranged along the spiral structure of your inner ear respond selectively to different frequencies according to mathematical relationships that mirror the logarithmic spacing of musical intervals. This biological frequency analysis performs mathematical operations similar to those used in digital signal processing, decomposing complex musical waveforms into their component frequencies and sending this mathematical information to higher brain centers for further processing and interpretation. Neural networks in your auditory cortex perform mathematical pattern recognition operations that extract musical meaning from the stream of frequency and timing information arriving from your ears. These networks have learned through years of musical exposure to recognize mathematical relationships that correspond to melodies, harmonies, rhythms, and musical structures, creating prediction algorithms that allow your brain to anticipate musical events and experience surprise, satisfaction, or tension based on whether actual musical events match your brain's mathematical expectations. This predictive processing creates much of music's emotional impact through the mathematical interplay between expectation and fulfillment. The mathematical principles governing musical memory reveal how your brain encodes and retrieves musical information using neural processes that mirror some of the mathematical operations found in computer science and information theory. Musical memories appear to be stored as patterns of neural connectivity that preserve the mathematical relationships between different musical elements, pitch intervals, rhythmic patterns, harmonic progressions, rather than storing absolute frequency values or timing information. This mathematical approach to musical memory explains why you can recognize familiar melodies even when they're transposed to different keys or played at different tempos. Rhythm processing in your brain involves mathematical calculations that occur across multiple timescales simultaneously, from the microsecond timing required to perceive individual musical events to the much longer timescales needed to perceive musical phrases and forms. Your nervous system maintains multiple internal clocks that track different mathematical aspects of musical timing, allowing you to simultaneously perceive the beat, the meter, the phrase structure, and the overall formal organization of musical pieces. These mathematical timing processes appear to involve neural circuits that oscillate at specific frequencies, creating biological clocks that can synchronize with external musical rhythms. The mathematical basis of musical emotion involves neural pathways that connect auditory processing areas to limbic system structures responsible for emotional response, creating direct mathematical links between specific acoustic relationships and emotional states. Research has identified mathematical patterns in brain activity that correlate with different emotional responses to music, suggesting that the mathematical relationships found in musical harmony and melody trigger specific patterns of neural activity that your consciousness interprets as joy, sadness, tension, or peace. These mathematical connections between sound and emotion appear to involve both innate neural responses and learned cultural associations. Musical consciousness also involves mathematical processes of attention and awareness that determine which aspects of complex musical information become part of your conscious experience. Your brain constantly performs mathematical calculations that separate musical foreground from background, identify melodic lines within complex harmonic textures, and track multiple simultaneous musical voices through sophisticated mathematical algorithms that would challenge even advanced computer programs. These attention mechanisms allow you to consciously follow specific musical elements, while maintaining awareness of the broader musical context. The mathematical synchronization between different brain regions during musical listening reveals how distributed neural networks coordinate their activity to create unified musical consciousness. Brain imaging studies show mathematical correlations in neural activity across regions involved in auditory processing, motor planning, memory, and emotion during musical experience, suggesting that musical consciousness emerges from mathematical coordination between these different neural systems, rather than arising from any single brain region. Individual differences in musical mathematical processing help explain why different people have varying levels of musical ability and different emotional responses to musical experiences. Some brains appear to be more mathematically sensitive to pitch relationships, others to rhythmic patterns, and still others to harmonic complexity, creating the diverse spectrum of musical talents and preferences found across human populations. These mathematical differences in neural processing create the beautiful diversity of ways that different individuals experience and create music. The mathematics of musical consciousness reveals how abstract numerical relationships become transformed into some of the most meaningful and emotionally powerful experiences human beings can have, demonstrating that consciousness itself might be understood as a mathematical process that converts patterns and relationships into subjective experience, meaning, and emotional truth, suggesting that the mystery of musical consciousness might illuminate fundamental questions about how mathematical information becomes conscious experience in general. In the gentle laboratories and creative studios where researchers and artists explore the frontiers of musical possibility, extraordinary mathematical developments are quietly unfolding that promise to transform our understanding of how music works, how it affects human consciousness, and what new forms of musical expression might become possible in the years ahead. These emerging mathematical tools and discoveries represent not just technological advances, but fundamental expansions in how we can explore, create, and experience the mathematical relationships that transform numbers into melodies, equations into emotions, and algorithms into art that touches the deepest aspects of human experience. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are revealing new mathematical patterns in musical composition and performance that human musicians and theorists never noticed, creating AI systems that can analyze vast databases of musical works to discover subtle mathematical relationships that operate across different styles, cultures, and historical periods. These mathematical discoveries are enabling AI systems to compose music that exhibits sophisticated understanding of style, emotion, and structure, while sometimes revealing mathematical patterns that challenge conventional music theory. The collaboration between human creativity and artificial mathematical intelligence is opening new compositional territories where mathematical precision and human intuition combine to explore musical possibilities that neither humans nor machines could discover independently. Quantum computing technologies promise to bring entirely new mathematical approaches to musical analysis and creation, using quantum algorithms that can process musical information in ways that classical computers cannot achieve. Quantum computers could potentially analyze the mathematical relationships in musical works with unprecedented depth and complexity, revealing patterns and structures that exist at mathematical scales beyond current analytical capabilities. These quantum mathematical tools might also enable new forms of musical synthesis and composition that exploit quantum mathematical principles like superposition and entanglement to create musical experiences that transcend the limitations of classical mathematical processing. Advanced neuroscience research is uncovering increasingly sophisticated mathematical models of how the brain processes musical information, leading toward potential technologies that could interface directly with neural musical processing systems. brain-computer interfaces designed for musical applications might eventually allow musicians to control instruments or compose music through direct neural mathematical commands, bypassing traditional physical interfaces entirely. These mathematical connections between brain activity and musical creation could enable new forms of musical expression, where thought becomes sound through purely mathematical translation processes. Spatial audio and immersive sound technologies are exploring mathematical approaches to creating three-dimensional musical experiences that surround listeners with precisely positioned sound sources, using advanced mathematical algorithms to calculate how sound waves should behave in virtual acoustic spaces. These mathematical sound field calculations can create musical experiences where listeners feel completely immersed in mathematically precise acoustic environments that can be designed and modified with extraordinary flexibility and precision. Virtual and augmented reality technologies combined with spatial audio mathematics are opening possibilities for musical experiences that integrate visual, spatial, and acoustic elements in ways that were previously impossible. Mathematical modeling of acoustic instruments is reaching levels of precision that enable virtual instruments to capture not just the average sound of traditional instruments, but the complete mathematical complexity of how real instruments behave under different playing conditions. These mathematical models can simulate the subtle, mathematical relationships between playing technique, environmental conditions, and acoustic output, with such precision that virtual instruments may soon become indistinguishable from their physical counterparts, while offering mathematical flexibility that physical instruments cannot match. Personalized music generation systems are being developed that use mathematical analysis of individual listening preferences, physiological responses, and even genetic factors to create music tailored specifically to individual mathematical profiles. These systems could potentially compose music that is mathematically optimized for specific therapeutic goals, emotional states, or cognitive enhancement purposes, creating personalized mathematical medicine where music is precisely calibrated to individual biological and psychological needs. New mathematical tuning systems and temperaments are being explored through computer technology that allows musicians to experiment with microtonal relationships and alternative mathematical approaches to organizing pitch that would be impossible to achieve with traditional acoustic instruments. These mathematical explorations of tuning space might lead to entirely new musical languages based on mathematical relationships that haven't been systematically explored in human musical culture, expanding the mathematical palette available to composers and performers. Mathematical analysis of musical improvisation and creativity is beginning to reveal the statistical patterns and mathematical structures that underlie spontaneous musical creation, potentially leading to AI systems that can participate in real-time musical improvisation with human musicians. These mathematical insights into creativity might also inform new educational approaches that use mathematical understanding to enhance human musical creativity rather than replacing it. The mathematical horizons of tomorrow's music suggest a future where human musical creativity and mathematical precision collaborate in increasingly sophisticated ways, where technological capabilities enable new forms of mathematical musical expression, while deepening our understanding of the mathematical principles that make music such a powerful form of human communication. These developing mathematical tools promise to expand rather than replace human musical creativity, opening new territories for exploration, where the ancient human impulse to transform mathematical relationships into meaningful sound can find ever more sophisticated and beautiful expression through the marriage of mathematical precision and artistic imagination. Here we are, dear sleepy scientist, at the gentle conclusion of our journey through the hidden mathematical universe that lives within every song you've ever loved, every melody that has moved you to tears, every rhythm that has made your heart dance in synchronization with cosmic patterns that connect the smallest vibrations to the grandest harmonies. We began this exploration by wondering why certain combinations of sounds could touch your soul so deeply, and we've discovered together that music isn't just art or entertainment, but rather mathematics made audible, numerical relationships transformed into the language that speaks most directly to human consciousness, through pathways that connect abstract mathematical truth to the most intimate experiences of beauty, emotion, and meaning. The beautiful mathematical story we've uncovered reveals that every aspect of musical experience emerges from precise numerical relationships that govern how sound waves behave, how frequencies interact, how rhythms organize time, and how your brain processes these mathematical patterns into conscious musical meaning. When you hear a perfect octave, you're experiencing the elegant simplicity of a 2-to-1 frequency ratio. When a melody moves you emotionally, you're responding to mathematical intervals that create tension and resolution through acoustic principles that operate with the precision of physics equations. When you feel the irresistible pull of a strong rhythm, you're synchronizing with mathematical patterns that mirror the biological rhythms governing your heartbeat, breathing, and neural oscillations. We've seen how harmony emerges from the mathematical relationships hidden within the harmonic series, where simple numerical ratios create the consonance that makes chords feel stable and beautiful, while more complex mathematical relationships generate the dissonance that creates musical tension and drives melodic forward motion. The scales that provide the mathematical architecture for melody follow interval patterns that balance mathematical simplicity with expressive possibility, creating frameworks where mathematical order enables rather than constrains creative expression. Even the most sophisticated musical forms reveal mathematical structures, symmetries, proportions, and recursive patterns that demonstrate how numerical relationships can be organized into temporal architectures that feel both intellectually satisfying and emotionally compelling. The mathematics of musical perception has shown us how your brain performs extraordinarily sophisticated calculations to extract meaning from the complex acoustic information that reaches your ears. Your auditory system automatically decomposes complex waveforms according to mathematical principles that mirror the Fourier transform, while your neural networks use statistical pattern recognition to identify melodies, harmonies, and rhythms within the mathematical chaos of real-world acoustic environments. The logarithmic mathematics governing pitch and loudness perception creates the curved perceptual landscape within which all musical experience unfolds, transforming the linear mathematical world of acoustic physics into the psychologically meaningful space of musical consciousness. Technology has revealed new dimensions of musical mathematics, from the binary poetry of digital audio that preserves musical information as precise numerical data, to the algorithmic synthesis techniques that create entirely new sounds from pure mathematical functions. Electronic instruments demonstrate how mathematical equations can become musical instruments, while computer analysis reveals mathematical patterns in musical works that were invisible to earlier generations of musicians and theorists. These technological tools haven't replaced human musical creativity, but rather expanded the mathematical palette available for musical expression, opening new territories where mathematical precision and artistic imagination collaborate in increasingly sophisticated ways. Cultural diversity in musical mathematics has shown us how the same acoustic principles can support infinite variety in musical expression, with different traditions making distinct mathematical choices about tuning systems, rhythmic organization, and harmonic vocabulary that reflect both acoustic possibilities and cultural values. Yet beneath this beautiful diversity, we've found mathematical universals, principles of perception, patterns of emotional response, and structural relationships that appear to connect musical experience to fundamental aspects of human consciousness, and perhaps to mathematical principles that operate throughout nature. The therapeutic applications of musical mathematics point toward future possibilities where sound and music serve as precisely calibrated mathematical medicine, using specific frequency relationships and rhythmic patterns to influence biological function, emotional states, and healing processes through pathways that transform mathematical precision into physiological and psychological benefit. The emerging frontiers of musical mathematics suggest even more extraordinary possibilities ahead, where artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and advanced neuroscience might reveal new mathematical dimensions of musical experience that we can barely imagine today. As you drift into sleep now, surrounded by the gentle silence that contains all possible musical mathematics in potential form, you're carrying with you a new understanding of the invisible numerical relationships that transform simple vibrations into the songs that accompany your most meaningful life experiences. Your dreams tonight might dance to mathematical rhythms, float on logarithmic curves of melodic possibility, and resonate with the harmonic frequencies that connect your consciousness to the fundamental mathematical patterns that seem to govern beauty itself. Sleep peacefully, knowing that the mathematics hidden in music connects you to universal principles that operate from the quantum realm to cosmic scales, transforming abstract numerical relationships into the most immediate and emotionally direct form of human communication, creating bridges between mind and heart, between reason and feeling, between the mathematical precision of physical law and the mysterious emergence of consciousness that can find infinite meaning and beauty in the endless dance of numbers becoming music, under the patient watch of stars that sing their own mathematical songs across the cosmos. Sweet dreams, fellow explorer of the magnificent mathematical universe that lives within every note, every rhythm, every harmony that makes existence more beautiful, more meaningful, and more connected to the deeper mathematical patterns that weave through all of reality's grand musical composition.